As a glorious soldier of the Empire. Holding this small long sword, laughing at every battle, chaos is feces. System release task, clearing up green skin items. Chop. Destroy the Skarvin mouse man's nest. Chop. Purge the beast man war gang. Cut it off and it's done. Sharp-eared elves. Outdated. Short-legged and short stack. Stubborn. The Knight of the Holy Grail of Barto. Eating feces. Kisriff Bear Cavalry. Eat the exhaust of my empire's half-griffin cavalry. Elements of this game. System, farming, western fantasy, medieval Warhammer, trace color evil, combat cultivation. Please collect more books, dear readers. New author, thank you. Keywords of the novel. A little soldier from the Middle Empire with no pop-ups. Download the complete collection of A Little Soldier from the Middle Empire, and read the latest chapter of A Little Soldier from the Middle Empire. Chapter 1. Berg Outpost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Berg Outpost. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of continuous logging echoed from the Black Forest. Squeak. The axe swung again, and the hollow trunk finally couldn't bear the weight of the trunk, falling to the ground with a loud bang. The man by the tree, with his axe flying up and down, chopping down branches and collecting firewood, is a daily task he must do. As autumn approaches step by step, the entire duchy's supplies become increasingly scarce. The Elector Marquis's direct jurisdiction, including the various Earl and Baron territories, and even the lower knightly fiefdoms, were unable to provide timely supplies for the soldiers stationed in defensive positions. Especially in the spring of this year, the long ship of North Norsk sailed south, and the large-scale invasion of raiders forced the vitality of the northern principalities to be severely damaged. A huge population has been plundered, villages have been burned, and the power of the entire empire in the north has greatly decreased. Ordinary people cannot even afford a day's worth of food and clothing, let alone weapons and armor. From the perspective of coal and firewood used for heating, there is a clear gap. The Midden territory was located in the northern part of the empire, with temperatures on average 10 degrees lower than those of the southern electorates. Especially near the border of the Drakavald forest, it was cold and gloomy day and night. Not paying attention to keeping warm at night and moving alone, not to mention the dangerous chaotic creatures in the dark, the cold can make an adult male lose his combat power. After finishing everything, Leland stood up straight, took a long breath, and looked further into the dense deep forest, his eyes habitually narrowing again. He forcefully straightened his back from his waist, and a brief relaxation boosted his spirits. The scenery in front of us is different from the familiar urban prosperity of the past. It naturally grows freely, and the boundaries of civilization dance with the wilderness. This is the medieval world, a world full of despair and sorrow. In front of him, although his body was part of the medieval human empire, his soul and spiritual will came from dimensions beyond the medieval world. Simply put, Leland's soul is a wandering outsider who possesses the body of an ordinary garrison soldier in this human empire. Strangely, the souls that have traveled through time have intact memories of the past, but only their names are lost in the past. At the beginning of his journey, Leland thought it was a dream of falling into deep sleep and not being able to wake up for a short period of time. On the third day, during a night raid by a beast man, he witnessed a big-horned beast grabbing and tearing up the robe beside him, and at that moment, the smell of blood filled his nostrils. He fainted without warning. For such inexplicable things, no one can explain them, and Leland has no chance to uncover the mystery within himself. Allowing anyone to experience such strange things would lead to fear, and Leland is no exception. Fortunately, he often hones his character and is considered a person with strong psychological resilience. At the moment he woke up after the war, he lay dumbfounded on the hospital bed, the entire ward filled with a damp and moldy smell, mixed with an unusually pungent smell of urine. Leland constantly pondered on life, pondering what to do in the future. One person curled up on the bed in a corner of the ward, with their back to the sentinel crowd. Other soldiers only consider him excessively sad, which is a common occurrence in the military. In the medieval world, human wars against darkness were full of despair, and each victory was just a struggle to survive, waiting for the next life and death war. A week later, Leland gradually accepted reality, and with the help of his possessed body's original memory, he also roughly understood his own situation and location. I am in one of the 12 electors and marquises of the human empire, the Midden Realm. Having the largest temple of the White Wolf god of war in the entire empire, Bure, extends from the Rik River in the south and the Westerland in the west, all the way to the free city of Marienburg in the east and Middelheim in the north. The border area is as vast as the southern Terabake collar. Leland knows a lot about this land, and the former Imperial Emperor Sigma once engaged in a divine battle with the powerful Thuringian Wolf-Head chieftain at the top of the White Wolf Mountain in Middelheim, which was crucial for the establishment of the great human empire in the future. Sigma's most important decision in becoming the human queen was to return the sovereignty of the 12 settlement chiefs over their territories, but demanded that the electors must be loyal to this unique human empire. In times of difficulty for the empire, each elector must lend a helping hand. Afterwards, the chieftain class also disappeared and was replaced by the title of Elector Marquis, which was inherited by various chieftain families. The operation of each territory is like a separate and independent duchy, except in the face of major crises or conferences, the imperial emperor convenes a meeting of electors and the imperial parliament, calling on each duchy to participate in discussions or recruit soldiers to coordinate supplies. In September of the year 2502 of the imperial calendar, the new Emperor Karl Franz ascended to the throne. Leland also celebrated his 20th birthday warrior ceremony in the same month, which was a tradition passed down by the Thuringen people, representing the appearance of a warrior who bears the name Bure. Leland still had a hint of excitement in his heart when he came to the medieval world. Countless epic battles and legendary heroes gather together, and every race has its glory and decline. Most importantly, with their powerful fists, they can dominate the medieval world. Just returning to ideals, reality is still cruel and suffocating with despair. At present, Leland is just an insignificant imperial soldier stationed at the outer outpost of the Dracovald forest. Especially with his unique appearance and a cowardly and deceitful personality in his past life, he is shamelessly ridiculed and trampled on his dignity. Being possessed, Leland became silent and didn't seem easy to bully. But the entire outpost, except for Captain Hanny, who is kind and occasionally cares about his life and training level, everyone else sees him as the heir. He is still the first one to do dirty and tiring work, and he is also entrusted with the daily chopping of firewood and feeding of horses. Leland doesn't care about this. What if the person who achieves great things can hold back for a while? Besides, he is so happy that others don't pay attention. Carry 3 bundles of chopped firewood and return along the original river path that passes through the outside of the forest. The area for chopping firewood is located in the inner layer of the forest, and it is not allowed to have trees blocking the outpost within a radius of 100 meters. This is not only to prevent wild beasts, but also to strengthen the defensive advantage of the shooting range. The river meanders towards the southwest, with the central mountain range located in the hinterland of the northern electorates. Nearly 90% of the rivers are supplied by the melting snow water from the summit of the central mountain range, including the Midden, Hock, Nord, and Oster. In this world, Leland was just transferred from the southern electorate's territory to the northern garrison 2 months ago, missing the scene of summer floods and river flooding. Now in the month, the water level of this river has dropped significantly, and there are many muddy areas exposed on both sides of the river. The vast human empire does not lack land, but there are very few arable lands that can be safely cultivated by serfs and self-farmers. Due to the vast territory of the empire, millions of people scattered across the vast territory, forming one village after another and one town after another. Similarly, every forest in the empire has countless orc men, and the valleys are filled with camps of green-skin orcs. In the southeast corner of the empire's territory, there is even a threat of midnight nobility. Leland possesses the most prominent characteristic of the Turing people, with a tall figure. 1,000 years ago, the Turing mad warriors were naked, and in the era when iron weapons did not appear, the ancestors of the Turing people were able to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the orc giants solely based on their physical fitness. However, the person possessed by Leland had a strong physique, and in his past, he was too cowardly in life. Everyone at the outpost could bully him. What sets Leland apart is that her hair is black, and her pupils are not the common brown-yellow color found in the Middletons. Not only physical features, but over time, Leland discovered special abilities within his body. After calming down his energy, Leland looked straight ahead and his consciousness moved. A transparent panel appeared before his eyes, with a pure white skull head embedded with a golden twin-tailed comet on the forehead at the top of the panel. Host. Leland, race. Human, level. LV1, equipment. None, lucky favor. 94-100. A panel that belonged to Leland's own free summoning, like most travelers, came to the other world with golden fingers, but 2 months passed and no events occurred. Leland noticed the small characters below the level. Experience value. 487-500. I increased my experience points by 3 points, so I didn't have to work hard in vain, he sighed. After more than a month of observation, Leland gradually understood the meaning of the numerical values appearing on this panel. Experience points are similar to experience points. With daily training of various abilities, such as sword fighting and chopping, the effect of increasing experience points can be achieved. Experience points are also linked to the level, and only by accumulating full experience points can one level increase. Before I could take a closer look, a light gray flash emerged and another panel popped out. Soldier task. Level reaches LV2-12. Leland was about to retract his gaze when he was momentarily stunned by the commotion. This was the first time the Pit Father system had responded, and looking at the newly popped-up panel, Leland felt a bit dizzy. Minion mission. Is the collaborative system clear about their current situation? An insignificant soldier who can sacrifice for the Empire at any time. In an instant, Leland had the urge to scold the system and let himself cross over into what was not good. Is it not good to just make do with an ordinary knight in Brittany next door, Adam? Having fiefdoms and serfs to support, I have been living aimlessly for a lifetime, and it's not impossible to just pass by like that. Maybe one day, the goddess will be lucky enough to take a sip of foot wash and become a licking dog knight. After taking a deep breath, Leland patted his forehead to clear himself up, calming down the humiliation in his heart and carefully read the reward text. Reward 1. Unlock personal attribute panel, host can use skill points. Reward 2. Lucky points increase by 3 points. Skill points. God knows which options the system will add, which is a good thing in short, but the second option is to increase luck, which Leland doesn't understand. Until now, the biggest confusion has been the lucky values on the panel, which are neither described in text nor daily reminders, making it quite mysterious. I thought it would be some kind of luck boost. In the medieval world, the god of luck can be said to be the most popular deity. Fortunately, Leland spent some time circling in the forest, hoping to pick up a knight's sword and a few copper and silver coins. However, he didn't encounter anything and walked down time and time again, only to step on many dried beastman feces. The system's lucky value will only automatically increase by 1 point every day, and over time, Leland will also let it go and let it change. Take it as it comes, and you'll be able to level up soon. Adding 3 more points of luck can make up 100 points, but I don't know what good things you'll give. Leland cleared his mind and quickened his pace towards the outer outpost of the forest. The forest in the afternoon is also very dangerous, and in order to avoid others noticing the problem, I deliberately went deeper into the forest to cut firewood. Leland was wearing a tattered, wrinkled blue and white soldier uniform, with its originally dull colors almost disappearing. He wore a dirty black felt hat on his head. The leather boots with severely cracked edges on their feet are no different from bare feet, apart from being called wearing shoes. Although he was wearing a somewhat shabby outfit and his clothes were as tattered and patchy as most Imperial soldiers, Leland's military uniform was still starched clean. Whenever he had time, he would go to the small river next to the outpost to change and wash his clothes in time. Hygiene awareness is necessary, and in case of infection with a certain pathogen, Leland cannot rely on the famous doctors of the medieval world. The underprivileged encounter extremely difficult illnesses, either waiting to die in place or being sent to the compassionate goddess Selena Church for pastor treatment, which can only be found in large towns. Due to a shortage of supplies, the weapons and equipment of most soldiers have not been replaced and maintained for a long time, and the most serious problem is not this. The granaries in the outposts are gradually bottoming out. A while ago at the outpost, Leland accidentally overheard a conversation between Captain Taka and a pioneer cavalry. Captain Toma had been worried about food, although he was more concerned about the amount of silver coins issued from above, so he could go to Bure town to enjoy it. The short-handled long sword hanging from the waist trembles with the steps. The long sword is a standard weapon widely used in provincial or conscripted soldiers, but an insignificant weapon is the greatest guarantee for the survival of countless imperial soldiers. In the medieval world, there were countless wars, and it was not easy to survive in the face of various ghosts, snakes, and gods. Leland walked eastward carrying firewood. Although his body was not as strong as a tiger's back or a bear's waist, it was still quite robust. Although his newly grown body walked several miles carrying a few heavy bundles of firewood, it still felt effortless. After a long time, he walked out of the Dracovald forest, and the sun was almost sinking into the western mountains, with orange afterglow shining all over his body. The outer layer of the deep forest is all flat land that has been cultivated, and when looking around, the terrain is open, with large areas of black soil connecting one place. In another dimension of the world, just the fertile soil and convenient irrigation on both sides of the river are enough to develop thousands of hectares of fertile farmland. In ancient times, it was just a beautiful luxury. At the end of the riverbank, from a distance, one can see a protruding hill with a majestic 6-meter-high watchtower towering inside the outpost, forming a semi-circular shape. The outer perimeter of the outpost is over 70 meters, and a 2-meter-high wall is built entirely with round logs, especially the highest point of the wall built by the water to the north is 3 meters. There is also a trench dug around the outpost, with sharp wooden spikes inserted at the bottom. Only the suspension bridges on the east and west sides can enter the outpost. If one accidentally falls, they will definitely end up facing the sky, making it easy to defend but difficult to attack. This is the defensive stronghold where Leland is stationed, with Midden in the southwest and Baron Draven in the Berg outpost, one of the 4 outposts under the town of Bure. A total of 23 Imperial soldiers are stationed here, including 11 melee sword and shield soldiers and spearmen, 8 crossbowmen, and 4 pioneer cavalry. Leland is one of the melee sword and shield soldiers. Most of the northwest of the Midden territory is covered by the Dracovald forest, and the threat of deep forest beasts and green skin forced the northern electors to build a large number of outposts and arrange defenses. There will be an outpost every 5 miles, and even 1 to 2 hereditary barons' castles will be located in some critical positions. Of course, the defensive strength will also greatly increase. The defenders of barons' castles alone may exceed 100 people, not to mention the conscription garrison sent by the Emperor and Marquis, with a maximum of over 600 people. The outpost occupies the entire hill, with a high and commanding terrain. Although located in a dangerous border area, stationed soldiers will still be arranged to cultivate some farmland within 50 meters of the outpost, planting daily vegetables such as vegetables, carrots, and chickpeas, all of which are fenced off. There is a water source nearby, and the fields around the outpost are relatively easy to irrigate. However, only the 50-meter circle can be cultivated, and there is no time to take care of it outside the warning range of the outpost, resulting in a large area of excellent land being abandoned. Leland quickened his pace and soon arrived at the trench outside the wall of Bella outpost. There is a wooden gate facing the west of the Draco-walled forest, with a height of 4 meters. At the center of the highest overhanging tower, there is a shield painted with a white wolf standing castle, symbolizing the Midden leadership sign. The garrison at Bella outpost usually relies on the suspension bridge of the overhanging tower for entry and exit. Leland avoided several hidden traps and walked to the ditch, shouting at the gate tower, "Put down the suspension bridge. I'm back." After shouting 3 times in a row, after a while, someone poked their head out of the gatehouse and saw that it was Leland. The person grinned and said, "Oh, the cowardly little fart spirit has come back to chop firewood. Why didn't they be caught, skinned, and eaten by those wild beasts in the forest?" Leland knew that this person was the annoying ghost, Maze, who often followed Captain Thomas with a feigned tiger-like aura. He treated the captain with a smile on his face, wishing to stick behind him for 24 hours. He treated the others at the outpost with a different expression, colluding with 4** to bully the newly recruited soldiers who had only been here for a few months. Leland in this world was often ridiculed by him, so he never had a good impression of him. Ignoring the ridicule, Leland just shouted, "Put down the suspension bridge." Maz made a fool of himself. As usual, Lurin's face turned red and he looked very amused when he couldn't speak. Recently, it seemed like someone had changed. Just as he was about to say a few more words, Yu Guang caught a glimpse of Abat, a veteran on duty who was not dealing with him, walking coldly from the other end of the wall. Motzi twitched the corners of his mouth, snorted coldly, and roared incessantly, "What's so urgent? You're only good for feeding horses, you scumbag." As he cursed and turned the hanging door rope, he lowered the suspension bridge and shouted towards the outpost, "The timid guy is back, everyone go and welcome him." Quickly, there was a lot of noise in the outpost, and 4 ragged men gathered behind the gate. One of them loudly said, "This Leland kid doesn't listen to the advice of the old soldiers. It seems like he can carry the whole sky on his own." "Is that him? The guy who fainted before he even went to the battlefield?" "Ha ha ha." Motzi walked slowly down the gate and sneered. The few people next to him were even more accommodating, laughing recklessly as they looked at the figure outside the door. Leland carried firewood on his back, and the suspension bridge creaked under his feet. His face was gloomy, and he walked forward on his own. Request tickets and collect. Book friend group number 959553208, end of this chapter. Chapter 2. Rise of Anger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Rise of Anger. As soon as I entered the fence of the outpost, a pungent odor rushed towards me. It was unclear whether it was the smell of livestock or human feces. In one side of the hay house, several wild boars kept in the fence were arching in the black mud, and the nearby stable had not been cleaned for a long time. Feces piled up in the wooden frame and nobody paid attention to it. The small mountain-like garbage in the corner of the wall emitted a rolling sour smell. In short, the entire outpost can only be described as dirty. The entire small outpost is inhabited by 23 people, with limited access to food, drink, and labor. Most of the soldiers stationed are uneducated, illiterate, and it is not likely that they can write their own names just by pulling out a soldier. After all, it is not their fault. Middle-world knowledge is also one of the sources of corruption, and those who are not familiar with the power of writing are highly likely to maintain a pure faith. Fortunately, it's not in summer, otherwise just mosquitoes and flies flying around would be a headache. As a person from a different dimension, Leland still has some difficulty adapting to the outpost environment. Along the semi-circular wall is a row of soldier houses, which are all paved without any compartments. There is no personal privacy between the soldiers, and there are large wooden barrels that are 1 person high placed on both sides of the houses. Every day at dawn, the rotating soldiers will go early to fetch water to ensure that the barrels are not empty. The soldiers at the outpost rely entirely on these 2 wooden barrels for their daily water supply. The 2-story wooden house on the innermost side of the wall is the private residence of Captain Toka and several close relatives. It is used for office work and daily inspection. A pioneer attendant is specially set up at the outpost, responsible for delivering to the station knights in Bure town a few kilometers away every evening. This is a fat job, and in the eyes of soldiers, it is undoubtedly a rare opportunity to leave the border for leisure. Leland walked towards the woodshed on his own. As soon as he put down 3 bundles of firewood in his front foot, someone followed him in his back foot. After a brief pause in his movements, Leland continued to be busy. "Kid, you're too brave to obey orders, right?" "All right. Hand over the copper coins issued last month obediently, and this month you only need to do one more thing to feed the horse." "If you don't listen, Matsi said in a rogue tone. Leland still bent down to untie the hemp rope that tied the firewood. 5 veteran soldiers, Yuzi, saw that Lurin was so ungrateful, gathered around and blocked the door of the firewood house. Outside the door, 2 soldiers, Yuzi, fiercely stared at the new recruits watching around. At the outpost, most of the new recruits had been beaten before, and those who were targeted by military officials quickly lowered their heads and dared not look directly at them. Although they rebelled against their ideals, Maz and his group flattered Captain Toka every day, and the latter ignored such things, turning a blind eye to them. Hands on resistance, it is only oneself who will suffer losses, and it is this mentality that leads to Matsi and others becoming more and more reckless. "You're okay, kid. Didn't you hear the boss talking to you? Pretending to be deaf, right?" Matsi felt embarrassed when he didn't react, and in anger, he pushed him hard. "Let's be honest. You have to pay today, and if you don't, you have to pay. There will be more chances of killing you in the future." Leland turned around and stared expressionlessly at Maze. Veteran Yuzi was half a head shorter in front of him, looking up at Leland's eyes. The latter was stared at and felt inexplicably scared. Why was the old coward so tough today? Matsi, after all, is a veteran with many years of experience. He doesn't treat his fellow countrymen with any softness. He pointed at Leland's nose and shouted, "A few days ago, I didn't teach you enough. Did you come back to fight again?" The soldiers in the room were all somewhat gloating, and a cold light flashed in Leland's eyes. His temper is not good at all. Can a tall and powerful person be bullied? In the past, when encountering such a situation, I have long ignored the situation and greeted my face with a punch. Kemedon has a clear rule that in case of violent conflict between soldiers, they must be handed over to local nobles for trial, with 20 lashes according to the law and a deduction of copper coins for the current month, without salary. Fight once, go hungry for at least half a month, and receive whipping. The outpost is not a town garrison, and Captain Toka has absolute leadership power. He will definitely face the soldiers of Maz's gang when the time comes. Maz kept mocking himself in front of him, his words becoming increasingly insulting, and his fingers were almost pointing under Leland's nose. In a stalemate, the transparent panel flashed out. Host Guide Task Release. Provoking Soldiers. Task Requirement. Beat him down. Reward, plus 30 experience points, add 1 skill point. The system is so lively that it's not a big deal, but Leland really likes it. As a person who doesn't make any profit and doesn't get up early, of course we should do it if there are benefits. Isn't it just a provocation? Easy. Leland's gaze at Maz gradually turned disdainful, and the corners of his mouth curved with mockery. The soldiers inside the house are all surprised. Is this still the cowardly coward? Matsi was also taken aback, his expression changing brilliantly. What's even more outrageous is that Leland spat on his feet in front of him. After finishing vomiting, Leland said contemptuously, "Get out of here, trash." At one point, everyone present opened their mouths in shock, and Matsi exclaimed angrily, "You're so good, Leland. You dare to talk to me like this, I really don't want to live. As he spoke, he swung towards Leland and hit him. Unexpectedly, Leland took the lead by holding down his wrist and slapped him fiercely, causing Maz to stumble on the soles of his feet. With a loud cry, a fierce punch hit Maz's nose bridge, and the latter rolled and flew directly out of the woodshed. At the outpost, everyone's gaze was fixed on Motzi lying on the ground, who struggled to get up, with his nose bridge half crooked and blood flowing from his nostrils. On the left side of his face, a red and swollen handprint was clearly visible. Motzi called out to the woodshed, "How dare you coward hit me? I'll fight with you." As he spoke, Leland took a bold step and bumped into the soldier in the way. He lifted his foot and threw a flying kick, forcing Motzi to fall to the ground on his back, with his toes forcefully kicking the latter's lower abdomen and a side kick sweeping over his shoulder. A set of movements flowed smoothly, and Motzi sprayed blood out like a torn sack lying on the ground, covered in dust and mud, panting and groaning in pain, and convulsing all over. Leland patted the dust on his body, and the bloodstains on his fists added a lot of evil energy. He turned his head and looked at a few soldiers behind him, saying calmly, "What about you?" As soon as he finished speaking, his figure was a bit robust. The system prompt flashes. Temporary task successful, reward 30 experience points, host level. LV2, 17800, host unlocks personal attribute panel. Do you want to add a personal line? Currently available points are 1, watching a few soldiers hesitating, Leland chose to immediately increase his spending. There was still a fight to be fought, and he poked through his embroidered pillow. From now on, the new recruits would not easily be extorted money by them. At this moment, the soldiers must have hated him in their hearts. A personal attribute panel immediately appeared, and the skill lines filled with entries quickly expanded. The entries that could be added points but only at the far left and right were all gray in color and could not be added points. Leland carefully observed the attributes of the entries that can now be added points, which are Swordsmanship Apprentice Melee Attack +3, Defense Apprentice Melee Defense +3, and Rush Impact/Charge Power +10. What I need most is to be able to intimidate this group of military experts, and it's best to show the difference in strength in an instant. The options of Melee Master and Defense Master tend to favor weapon game, but now whenever one grabs a wooden stick, their nature changes, evolving from violent conflict to armed resistance, causing unnecessary setbacks. Without hesitation, Leland chose to increase the charging power. Confirm bonus, Reckless Impact, Charge Power +10, Leland noticed a warm current flowing through his body, and his thigh muscles became more and more bulging. At this moment, if there was a mud wall in front of Leland, he could effortlessly break through it. A few soldiers look at me, and I look at you, all of them are shocked. In front of me, Lurin's figure stands out a bit, and his overall demeanor is vastly different from usual. They also noticed that the new recruits who were used to being bullied by them on weekdays were all staring at them with dark currents flowing in their eyes. We can't just let Leland shine like this. The sense of crisis stimulated the soldiers' final rationality. One soldier rushed forward shouting and shouting, trying to teach the ignorant guy in front of him a lesson. The others rushed out one after another, and for a moment, their momentum was overwhelming. The system panel reappears. Temporary task 2 release. Win them. Reward, plus 100 experience points, an additional lucky draw reward. It's really not a big deal to watch the excitement, it just showed me how strong the charging effect is. Leland calmed down, steadied his steps, and slightly bent down. Then, his legs suddenly exerted force, using his shoulders as a shield, he fiercely collided like a bull. Bang! At the moment of the confrontation, the situation suddenly turned around, and with a rolling sound of, "ah," from the leader, Yuzi flew out like a broken kite. A collision shocked the whole scene, and the soldiers on both sides widened their eyes and swung their fists a bit slower. Leland saw Jijiji grabbing the wrist of the left soldier, who stumbled as he was pulled. However, He saw a fist getting bigger and bigger in front of him, and with a loud bang, he was knocked down to the ground. In a group fight, the most important thing is to catch one and then hammer to death. It's better to cut off one finger of the enemy than 10 fingers. Before crossing, Leland was skilled in hand-to-hand combat, not to mention his now stronger physique. In the world before crossing, he is definitely a skilled boxer. Leland turned around and once again welcomed a bald soldier, who was so fast that he didn't have time to be on guard. Leland shouted loudly, "Drink." With his right fist hitting his bald face, the soldier screamed in shock, his arm tightly protecting his head. Leland took the opportunity to lift his knee and hit the latter's lower abdomen, causing the soldier to immediately fall to the ground with a scream. A soldier picked up a wooden stick from somewhere, blushing and smashing it at the back of Leland's head. Leland shouted again, "Death." The footsteps took a turn, avoiding the crucial point, but the wooden stick was firmly knotted and hit his shoulder. The pain stimulated his nerves, and he fought hard to knock down the soldier and slapped him with a round palm. A slightly shorter soldier outside the field saw that Lurin was completely helpless when he rushed left and right, and his heart was filled with enthusiasm. He was often bullied by those people like Maz on weekdays, but now someone stood up to resist and of course, he needed help. The short soldier shouted to the others, "Kill these bastards." After speaking, he picked up a wooden stick and blushed, shouting and rushing into the venue. The other soldiers who were used to being bullied on weekdays were also hot-blooded at this moment. They immediately rushed into the field and fought with the soldiers. The punches and screams of physical violence could be heard from time to time, and the new recruits were being bullied so miserably on weekdays. At this moment, the force they used to beat the soldiers was 10 times greater. The number of military personnel is already small, and they are able to extort new recruits on a daily basis because they do not unite and resist. Now that their backbone, Leland, takes the lead, the situation is naturally different. A situation where one soldier is beaten by 2 soldiers on average, resulting in a one-sided situation. Suddenly, a loud shout sounded from the wall. "Stop it all! Captain Toka is back!" A rapid sound of horse hooves echoed from far to near, confirming what had just been said. A group of people quickly dispersed in the open space of the outpost in Wyanjiang, and several soldiers all fell to the ground convulsing and howling. Some soldiers were still unsatisfied and didn't forget to kick more to vent their anger. Just a few minutes later, Leland also had a smile on his body, half of his face tied up and he was punched hard. After a fight, his stamina reached its limit. The next second, the system prompt will appear. Temporary task 2 successful, reward, plus 100 experience points distributed. Extra lucky draw once. Additional reward, 1 skill point. Obtained feature. Imposing, range plus 4 leadership, leadership is equivalent to morale. The higher the leadership of a unit, the more it can withstand high combat losses, and some legendary units are never defeated. And in terms of personal characteristics, a fight adds a majestic aura. Literally, it seems pretty good. After this incident, Leland felt the long pent-up frustration dissipate and was full of confidence in his own strength, at least having the ability to fight on the battlefield. Leland looked at the soldiers who had just beaten up the military oil with him. The only one he knew was the short soldier Levin, a young soldier of only 19 years old who, like him, came from Baron Draven's collar. No wonder he comes out to help himself at the first time. These days, Raven is responsible for various miscellaneous tasks every day, and is occasionally bullied and ridiculed by Motzi and others. Upon seeing Leland looking at him, Raven smiled back and the soldiers around him burst into laughter. "What's going on? Who moved their hand?" The suspension bridge at the east gate of the outpost was just lowered, and a series of creaking sounds made 3 hurried figures rush in. The leader is the outpost officer Toka. As a military officer, his treatment was much better than that of ordinary soldiers like Leland, let alone the flattery and filial piety of the mazes. Compared to the soldiers stationed at the outpost, his face was full of oil, and a pair of narrow eyes on his hooked nose occasionally emitted vicious gazes. As the captain, he wore a deep blue long suit, complete with chest armor, leg armor, and neck guard. The semi-open and closed steel helmet was adorned with a cluster of white background blue tail feathers, and the other waist tags were also made of high-quality sturdy wood. There was no response from around, and Toka looked at the few people lying on the ground, all of whom were skilled soldiers, especially the Motzi, foaming at the mouth and convulsing all over his body. He looked as if he had been beaten to death, and even the standing soldiers were all in the red. He keenly sensed the complexity of the matter. Habitually squinting his eyes, Toka said in a gloomy tone, "What a big courage. Who did it? Stand up." As he spoke, the officer drew out his long sword from his waist, and the two vanguard cavalry behind him responded, pulling out their weapons together and staring fiercely at the Leylands. Leland took a deep breath and took a step forward, only to find someone walking in front of him. "I did it." Raven walked out of the crowd, trying to stand straight and forcing himself to look at Taka. From just now on, in the dark, Leywin felt an inexplicable force inspiring his courage and fighting spirit. He usually compromises, but now he has to face it openly. Several soldiers in the field all moved forward, standing with Raven. "I did it. It has nothing to do with Levin and the others. I did it. If you want to punish me alone." Toka's face was like sinking water, undoubtedly hitting his bottom line when it comes to his actions of conquering the enemy. This is also a common problem among imperial military officers, and it seems necessary to once again establish his authority. He raised his long sword and pointed it directly at Raven, saying with a mournful tone, "Disrupting military discipline, cholera outposts, ignoring the law and engaging in armed conflicts with comrades. In the name of Count Wendell, I will escort you to the garrison camp and wait for your departure." But suddenly, Taka rushed forward and shouted loudly, "I'll depose you first." The situation turned rapidly, and the soldiers did not expect Toka to be so ruthless. Faced with the sword blade of his superior, Leywin did not escape and remained tense. Chung at the intersection of two long swords, Leywin looked in surprise as the tall figure in front of him blocked the sharp blade. Request tickets and collect. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Lucky Lottery. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Lucky Lottery. Toka immediately withdrew his sword and confronted Leland. He was furious and pointed at the soldier in front of him, shouting sternly, "Leland! Do you dare to confront me with your sword? Do you want to rebel?" Inside the outpost, needles could be heard falling, and everyone looked incredulous. Maz, who had just been shaken out of a coma, sat on the ground, watching the scene, his mouth wide open and dumbfounded, forgetting to wipe the blood from the corners of his mouth. On the wall, the patrol veteran Abat lay beside the wall, changing his usual idle demeanor. His eyes were sharp and he stared at Leron. Even the two vanguard attendants behind Captain Taka were stunned. Is this person in front of me still the cowardly and timid guy from a few days ago? Although everyone had recently noticed a change in Leland, they never expected to be so bold as he stuffed with a white wolf inside his body. Someone widened their eyes and said, "He's crazy. Leland must be crazy." Holding a long sword in the same hand, Toka's aura was much lower than that of Leron. Feeling the dangerous aura on Leron's body, the soldiers who had just fought with him instinctively moved away from Leron. "Captain, we acted recklessly without fully investigating the cause of the whole incident. One person died, which can explain the Beastman attack. 2 people died, which can also be explained clearly." Leland looked at him coldly and said word by word, "If there were a few more deaths, there would be a large-scale armed conflict between the stationed troops at the outpost, and it would be difficult for you to handle the border defense camp." After a few words, everyone's gaze turned back to Taka, who was just staring fixedly at Lurin. He dare not move now. Toka only felt a bruise on his wrist. Just now, when he hit the sword, the sudden force from the sword almost made Toka unable to grip the handle. Such power is simply unimaginable. Leland turned to look at Maz sitting on the ground and said in a deep voice, "They wanted to forcibly snatch my money, and then they started punching and kicking me. Leland and the others couldn't stand them bullying me like this, so they came forward to help. I hope Captain Taka can understand everything and give us justice." Motsi's flushed face turned white, and no one would completely tear their faces apart on weekdays. Leland now put this matter on the table and said, "Let alone in the current situation, this is a public execution. Soldier Yuzi's mind is still clever, otherwise he wouldn't be able to engage in theft, deceit, and extortion." Motsi let out a burst of tears and crawled towards Toka, quickly hugging her thigh and wailing, "Your Highness is in charge of me. This Lurin hit me indiscriminately. I just went up with kindness to help him untie the firewood rope, but I didn't expect him to slap me out." He didn't turn his head and pointed at the people around Levin, crying and shouting, "The people around me wanted to come up and fight, but Levin and those people even turned to that bastard Lelin. They started hitting people and said we wanted to take their money." As Motsi spoke, he raised his left face to Taka and said, "Sir. This is evidence. You must make the decision for us." A few soldiers also learned from Maze, crying and crawling up to Toka's side, looking very comical. Anyway, the captain was not at the outpost just now, who is the most pitiful and who is more reasonable. Lewandowski's face turned red behind Lewandowski, and he couldn't help but curse, "Fuck your mother. It was clearly your first move. You even falsely accused Lewandowski of hitting you." The soldiers did not respond and instead cried louder. The soldiers who were bullied by military officials on weekdays stood on the side of Lurin, and in their view, killing Motsi and others was not a problem. Toka was also caught in a dilemma for a while, with Maz giving him many benefits both openly and secretly. Every time he extorted, 50% of the money would come into his hands. Otherwise, with his little treatment, he would not be able to be carefree and happy in Bree Town. Normally, with one eye open and one eye closed, Toka is not involved in it and can take a lot of benefits. Toka has long been accustomed to squeezing ordinary soldiers at outposts, but now Lelin has made it clear that he cannot ignore this. Especially since the soldiers have united, they are about to cause a mutiny. If we let go of Maze, Leland and his group will mutiny on the spot. If we don't let go of Maze, where will our authority be in the future? There will always be a second time. Toka felt nauseous as he watched Maz cry. If he didn't stay at the outpost for a while, they would just create such a big mess. Those who had rebelled before were not handled well. Why can't even a single Laron be helpless today? How much money do you give me every month? The people below have such a big reaction, and privately they don't know how much copper coins they have collected. If something happens, they want to rely on me. At the thought of these, Tekartan was furious. He broke free from his thighs and kicked Maz in the lower abdomen, cursing angrily, "Useless thing. We must clarify our connections. If we get involved, I'll be in danger myself." Toka had a sudden idea and shouted, "This matter still needs to be investigated by all parties. First, take the injured to the hospital room. All soldiers involved in this matter will be punished with 10 military batons. Put them in a detention room. Once we find out, we'll report to the military camp." Toka's reaction surprised everyone off the field. With such a large-scale military conflict, only 10 batons were punished by each person. The soldier who was hit by Lelin so fiercely is still in a coma. Just let him go so easily. The listeners had different reactions, and the several bullied new recruits led by Leland breathed a great sigh of relief, while Maz was colorless on the one hand, and Toka meant to ignore them. The situation at the outpost has undergone a slight change. A few hours later, the night shrouded the sky, with cloudless weather for thousands of miles. Stars shone, and the bright moon Manasbury and the evil moon Moresbury hung high in the sky, shining together. The bright moonlight shines between the vast earth and the mountains and steep mountains. Under the bright moonlight, the Berg outpost stands like a lone night watchman on the edge of the Dracovald forest. At night, only the torch at the top of the watchtower and a few key points on the wall were lit with torches to illuminate the outpost. After dinner, except for the patrol soldiers on duty, everyone else had to sleep, and there was no light in the large shop. The mutiny caused by Leland's leadership has been quelled, and the former soldiers are all crowded in the only ward at the outpost tonight. At this moment, they are lying on the haystacks crying and wailing, and the wailing may last until the latter half of the night until their bodies are weak. After finishing a fight, Leland himself did not suffer much damage, and the 10 soldiers who were punished afterwards were beaten lightly. After all, the ones who executed the punishment were also sentinel soldiers. Even the soldiers responsible for punishment dare not strike hard, even with the strength demonstrated by Leland today. Motzi's way of dealing with people is not pleasing to anyone, but Leland's recent rise has actually added a lot of prestige to the soldiers. However, the new recruits from Ley 1 did not receive that kind of treatment. They were all beaten with 10 army batons one by one. Just now, Ley 1 and his companions lay in bed, gritting their teeth and moaning in pain. It seemed that the army batons were still beating them hard. Leland lay comfortably on the hay bed, not caring about the discomfort of the hay diaphragm. His personal level was upgraded to LV2, and he had a lucky draw opportunity. Today was a very happy and comfortable day. After this fight, he was also full of confidence in his fighting ability. A soft voice whispered in my ear, "Leland, Leland." Upon hearing someone call him, Leland turned his head and saw Levin and 2 new recruits standing next to his bed, looking like they had something to say. "What's wrong?" Leland sat up and asked. With an embarrassed smile on his face, Levin reached out and scratched his head, watching as Leland stared at him, feeling a bit hesitant to speak. The 2 new recruits next to him were also about the same, looking embarrassed. Looking at their expressions, Lauren guessed the approximate reason and smiled, saying, "Everyone is a comrade in arms. If you have anything, just let me know." After listening to Laron's words, Levin nodded, took out a cloth bag from his worn jacket pocket, and handed it to Laron. Lewin was a little confused, and slowly said, "Brother Laron, take this, this is our intention." "Mind." Leland felt a bit confused as he took the cloth bag. The palm-sized cloth bag was heavy, and as he picked it up, there was a faint sound of metal collision. Lowering his head, he untied the rope at the opening of the bag, which contained about 40 copper coins. A regular soldier can earn up to 5 silver coins per month, and the exchange rate between copper coins and silver coins is 10.1, which means that a soldier can earn up to 50 copper coins per month. Soldiers need to pay for weapon maintenance and clothing themselves, and the money in the bag is about the income of the 3 people in front of them for a month. "You guys," Leland reached out and picked up a copper coin, hesitating. "Give me money." "Why?" 3 new recruits, you look at me, I look at you, stuttering. Finally, Raven spoke up and said, "Every month, those guys like Maz steal more than half of our salary from us. Today, you taught them a lesson, and we just want to thank you." Leland understood, and his heart also softened. Tie the cloth bag back together and say in a gentle voice, "Today's lesson to them is also for myself. You don't need to thank me or anything like that. Take all the money back." Leland forcefully pushed the money bag back into Raven's hand, who was holding it in a daze. Lei Wen's eyes were full of gratitude, and he lowered his head in a mournful tone. "Brother Leland, I've mocked you with others before. You won't be angry, will you?" Laughing. What was mocking about me before? Leland thought to himself. Leland's face was filled with a smile and he said nonchalantly, "Let him pass the past. We are all comrades in arms, there's no need for this. It's getting late, you still have to patrol tomorrow. Hurry up and go back and rest. Gain 3 devout points," the system prompt appears abruptly. After Raven and the others fell asleep, Leland quickly called up the system panel. From the bottom of my heart, I asked, "System, what is the devout value?" A few small lines of text appear on the panel. Devotion value increases when the host is respected by others, reaches a certain value, and randomly gives battle bonuses and rewards, providing special skills and equipment. Special skills. Special equipment. Battle bonuses. Leland couldn't help but be surprised. Because of his gentle refusal of gratitude from Lei Wen and the others, it actually increased their respect for him. Leland was excited in his heart. When he saw that the lowest level reward for devoutness required 50 points of devoutness, it was like pouring cold water on a flame. 50 points of devout faith value, which means at least 50 people need to respect oneself in order to achieve the minimum reward, but the entire Berg outpost only has 23 soldiers. Even if everyone in the outpost is split in half, it is almost enough in a short period of time. The 50 points of devout faith value cannot be gathered together. A prompt pops up on the panel. Host has 1 skill point and 2 lucky draws. Do you want to use it now? First, use skill points. For the first time, Leland was added to the reckless charge, and it turned out that the system bonus was quite impressive. A single charge could knock down ordinary soldiers and slightly increase leg strength. There are only 2 options for adding points on the panel: Melee Apprentice / Melee Attack +3 and the Defense Apprentice / Melee Defense +3. At present, the effect of increasing defense is not significant. Leland needs to enhance the probability of survival in the battlefield. Only by killing enemies can he survive in the battlefield. Confirm selection. Melee Apprentice, confirm. After adding some extra points, Leland realized that he had come up with the secret to using weapons out of thin air, as if he had personally experienced a period of training. This is too awesome. Leron could not help expecting what the lucky draw of the system would give. The attribute panel has been removed and replaced by a turntable panel, divided into 8 large fan-shaped sections, each of which is further divided into 3 smaller sections. Leland immediately regained his composure, rubbing his hands and preparing to turn the wheel. There are a total of 24 squares, including 6 special squares, 6 weapon and equipment squares, 6 resource squares, and 6 magic squares. Among them, there are 4 squares with purple levels, 8 squares with blue levels, and the rest are all green levels. The reward effect and attribute bonuses based on color classification are often much better than blue or green levels. Leland looked at the resource grid, which contained many things, mostly physical objects, with their background colors all green, which was the lowest level. One of the resources on the turntable is 30 silver coins, which is actually the most useless for Leland's current situation. In other words, the resource grid is like adding icing on the cake and cannot enhance Leland's own strength. Without much pause, Leland looked towards the special grid. The special grid is true to its name, with 2 construction orders in the 6 grids, namely the Sacred Grove and Wooden Watchtower. The remaining 4 are all special attribute entries, namely the blue level, Military Oil Seed Nemesis, the green level, Small Leader, Good Reputation, and the most puzzling purple level, Friend of the Forest. What are the things provided by the system? Are they reliable or not? Leland muttered inwardly. Leland looked at magic and weapons and equipment, and unexpectedly found that these 2 were actually the best. Magic includes the green level, Radiance, Divine Blessing, Forest Shield, Gale, and the blue level, Fighting Enthusiasm, as well as the peripheral purple level magic, Eagle Eye. As for the weapons and equipment, there are also very good things, such as the only purple grade armor, a complete set of blessed white wolf knight plate armor, and a blue grade Imperial Warhorse. But what Leland really wants is the highest grade Eagle Eye magic. From a god's perspective, you can see all the characters and buildings within a 100-meter range. It's incredible. In the future, if you run away on your own, tracking will definitely be useful. Leland rubbed his palm and muttered, "No resources, no features, no magic. You need eagle eyes, you need eagle eyes." Leland kept muttering incessantly, gathering courage and reaching out to turn the turntable. A spot of light appeared at the top of the turntable and quickly rotated. Perhaps too much force was applied, and the turntable spun extremely fast, accompanied by the rapid rotation of the light spot. Leland's eyes also followed the light spot, spinning back and forth in a daze. He held his breath, afraid that the light would fall into a bad grid. Finally, the speed of the turntable slowed down, and the dots fell out one by one. 30 silver coins have passed. The Sacred Grove building has passed. Complete set of Blessing White Wolf Knight armor, damn it. It's also passed. Double-tailed Comet Warhammer, it's gone again. The speed of the turntable is getting slower and slower, and there will be at most 3 or 4 squares left before it stops. Watching as he quickly turned to Eagle Eye magic, Leland tightly closed his eyes and kept praying to the god of luck in his heart. Finally, the spot of light stopped moving and fell into one grid. Leland closed her eyes tightly, took deep breaths, and slowly opened them. Damn it. How did you draw this? Requesting tickets for collection, there is still a night shift. End of this chapter. Chapter 4, Second Lottery. Heram Warhammer. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4, Second Lottery. Heram Warhammer. There is a great difference between what is in the heart and what is in reality. Fate likes to joke with people, not giving what you want, but falling in front of you for what you don't want. The light spot is impartial and falls precisely on the dazzling magic of the green level. The turntable disappeared in one breath, and a stream of light pierced through Leland's mind, giving him no chance to repent. Lurin's mood was a bit depressed, giving whatever he didn't want. Although it's not a feature with minimal gain, the dazzling magic is not as practical as 30 silver coins. A small line pops up in my mind. Radiance is a light spell that creates a light source with an intensity roughly equivalent to a torch. The light source will appear in your palm, cane, or other parts of your body. The light source consumes 1 mana wind for every 5 minutes of duration. Leland let out a long sigh. What is the use of a free torch? Save yourself money. Upon second thought, Leland realized that the dazzling magic was not completely useless. It could generate light sources in other parts of the body, such as the head or back of the head. Although it cannot cause substantial harm, in some specific situations, a sudden light source lights up behind the head. Thinking about that scene, TSK, if some more miracles were to be created, perhaps people would be regarded as the chosen Sigma gods. After drawing the dazzling magic, Leland closed his eyes and realized that there was an additional frame in his mind, which bound about 13 points of magical wind for his own use. The efficiency of the system is extremely high. After taking a few breaths, Leland has confirmed that he has completely learned the dazzling magic and reached the level of practice makes perfect. Can I be considered a Fae now? A few minutes later, Leland opened his eyes and prepared for the second lottery. Consciousness twitched, and the system lottery wheel reappeared. There are still 24 squares on the roulette, but the options have changed to some extent. The entire set of Blessing White Wolf Knight armor that appeared last time has disappeared, and there are also 2 war hammers that have not appeared. It seems that the things given by the roulette are random. Upon careful observation, Leland was pleasantly surprised to find that the purple grade eagle eye was still present. In the last lottery, there were only 2 squares between Yaoguang and Eagle Eye. I couldn't help but feel congested inside. Seeing Eagle Eye magic again this time, I definitely hope to get it. Except for Eagle Eye, the money given to the material grid this time was actually even less, with a maximum of only 40 copper coins per grid. The purple level of the bottom weapon equipment has been replaced with the Heram Warhammer, a weapon that looks extremely antique from the appearance, and the hammer handle is also embedded with a small piece of elliptical crystal. Lucky God, how pitiful I am. Let me draw a purple rank magic once. Leland rubbed his hands excitedly, his mood stirring. He must have won the Eagle's Eye in the second lottery opportunity. After calming down for a while, I started turning the turntable. This time, Leland saw the position of the eagle eye accurately, and when it turned, the force decreased by a few points. At the beginning, the speed of light rotation was still very fast, and it was impossible to see what to draw. Leland was even a bit hesitant to look and closed his eyes until the turntable was about to stop before opening them. The speed of the light spot has slowed down. Leland's vision is that he will stop within 5 squares at most, while the eagle eye of the purple grade is in the 3rd square. I'm going to turn my luck around. The light moved 1 grid and arrived at the characteristic small leader. What kind of reward is this when it comes to features that Leland really didn't take notice of? I haven't seen any specific bonuses for the majestic features I gave before. Light point took another step forward, and one more step forward was the eagle eye magic that Leland had been longing for. Stop it, stop it. Stop it for me. Leland's eyes widened, his face flushed, and his hands tightly clenched in one place. The light trembled and finally fell into the eagle eye grid. Just as Leland felt confident that he could release his breath, he only heard a faint snap. Light walked forward 3 squares in one breath. What? Leland was stunned and his nervous body trembled slightly, almost unable to catch a breath. System. How are you playing with me? After experiencing the ups and downs of emotions, Leland felt his head empty and fell onto the bed. The bright moonlight shone through the broken hole in the roof. It also shone on Leland's unattainable face. Leland really didn't dare to see what the light spot had drawn for him. After the eagle eye magic, it turned green, mostly useless features or supplies like the radiance. I accept my fate. Leland lay in bed and let out a long sigh, let it be fate. Sitting straight, my gaze swept away one by one. Green grade features. Not available. Green level magic is not available. Blue grade weapons and equipment not really. Is it a construction token? Still not. When his gaze was fixed on the grid where the spot of light was located, Leland's mouth was wide open enough to hold 3 eggs. Sigma is on top. Purple level weapon. Heram Warhammer. The system lottery wheel disappeared, the draw was completed, and the hammer floated in front of Leland. The handling was extremely heavy, and I almost couldn't hold it firmly, falling to the ground and making a muffled sound of heavy objects. Fortunately, all the soldiers in the room had fallen asleep at this point, and their snoring was deafening. If they were awakened, it would be difficult for Leland to explain. At the moment when Leland grabbed the hammer with both hands and grasped the handle, the weapon and the user had a similar intention. In Leland's mind, scenes of tragic battlefield flashed like a lantern. Weighing the weight of the war hammer, it is especially suitable for breaking the skull of foolish creatures. It will definitely be great to swing it round and throw it out. The introduction of Heram's hammer comes to mind. Breaking armor and killing, counter heavy armor plus 4 melee attacks, counter large, and add soul fire effect to the warhammer during battles. Breaking armor and killing. Anti-large. Scale. The fire of the soul. Purple equipment is strong. In this way, Leland's melee strength has greatly increased. In the medieval world, those who wielded war hammers on the battlefield were the real men. Do those female cannons in the southern kingdom who play stab swords dare to confront the chaos of hard and hard? No way. I don't have that ability. I didn't win the eagle eye magic draw, so I can only hope for the next lucky draw. I won a purple level battle hammer, which is not a loss in terms of both sides. It is clearly unrealistic to place such a large war hammer next to Leland, and we need to find an opportunity to reveal it reasonably. Leland had an idea in his mind that there was a Sigma church in the town of Bure, not far from here. Before that, let's first install the Heram Warhammer into the system warehouse. After doing everything seamlessly, Leland lay on the hay bed, deep asleep to the snoring of the soldiers on both sides. Request tickets and collect. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Can breakfast also add dedication? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Can breakfast also add dedication? The sky was just beginning to dawn, and the night had not completely faded. The assembly bell rang through the outpost, and there was a loud and chaotic sound in the soldiers' bunk. Some people haven't slept enough yet, confused and open their eyes. Leland was drowsy and also awakened by the commotion of the crowd. He was too excited after last night's lottery and couldn't fall asleep. He tossed and turned on the bed for a while before finally falling asleep. Upon hearing the morning bell at the outpost, Leland swiftly put on his military uniform, put on his leather boots, and walked out of the large shop. I woke up early and the gathering bell would ring for a while, so there was no need to rush over. During this free time, Leland prioritized personal hygiene. Good morning, Brother Leland. Did you sleep well last night? Leland was bending over to wash his face when Leland and two new recruits walked over and said hello. After vigorously rubbing his hand and shaking off the water on his face, Leland stood up and said, "Good morning, my shoulders are a bit sore, I'm not sleeping well." He raised his eyebrows and asked in reverse, "What about you guys? You were really beaten 10 times, didn't you sleep soundly last night?" "Don't mention it, the place where the military stick hit me hurt for a while yesterday. I couldn't sleep and rolled around in bed for 2 months. It wouldn't be better. My body isn't as strong as Leonardo's. Fighting those soldiers is like fighting a chick." Levin shrugged. "It hurts so much that you can't sleep. Are you snoring the most?" Leland chuckled and said, "Eat more food, work harder, and you'll have more energy. No one will dare to bully you in the future." "Well, Leonardo is right." The new recruit on the side smiled and didn't say anything. Lewin thought of something and said to Lurin, "Listen to Abat and the other veterans say that the tasks assigned to you today are much less. It seems like you only need to chop firewood, and the rest will be handed over to someone else. Make yourself do less work." It seems that yesterday's incident left a deep impression on Taka, and he dare not make any visible obstacles, but it does not mean that he has done something secretly. Leland casually said, "I will do as much as I allocate. They used to bully new recruits, but now they have a sense of defense and dare not exert more pressure on us. Gather. Gather. Everyone come over," someone shouted loudly from high in the watchtower. "Let's go." Leland waved and strode over, followed by Raven and the others. As usual, the sentry officer Toka wears armor and stands on the platform in front of the tower. 23 soldiers lined up in 3 rows at Berg outpost, with only 3 vanguard cavalry in the front row. The second row consisted of sword and shield soldiers and spearmen, while the last row consisted of crossbowmen and logistics soldiers. Toka stood on the platform with his hands behind his back, habitually scanning downwards, his gloomy gaze resting on Laron for a second. When the soldiers who rang the assembly bell on the watchtower hurriedly ran down and stood in the queue, Toka cleared his throat and loudly said, "You all heard me. This week's shift patrol, the second team will replace the first team. Feed the horses, clean the stable and clean the toilet. Leave it to Colorado, Marlin is in charge. You two must clean the stable and toilet thoroughly today. If it's a bit dirty, let me eat it in public." The 2 people who were pointed out were all military experts who usually hang out with Maz. Toka threw the dirty work that Lurin had done in the past to them, clearly intending to cut them off and vent yesterday's anger. Kakalo and Marlin looked at each other with a bitter expression on their faces, but dared not express any resentment and had to bow their heads. Everyone else's tasks remained the same. Work for me after breakfast. Disband. After finishing his last sentence, Taka glared at Leland fiercely before turning and leaving. The soldiers dispersed and headed towards the kitchen to have breakfast. A few soldiers gathered together, not daring to look at Leland, but quickly walked away. The other soldiers felt angry when they saw this scene, pointing and teasing them. Leland's expression was calm, completely disregarding the gaze of others, and he quickly walked towards the kitchen. Today, the logistics soldier in charge of making meals took extra care of Leland, giving him 2 pieces of black bread and a baked potato as if trying to please him. The other soldiers only had at most 1 spoonful of stewed vegetables, while Leland was full and almost overflowing from the edge of the bowl, with 2 small pieces of stewed meat placed on top. The dietary habits of the imperial people were more similar to those of the Middle Ages, with fewer types of food and very monotonous cooking methods. Vegetables were either made into salads or cooked in pots to make stews. It is normal for ordinary people to have less than 1 meal of meat in 2 or 3 days. Several dilapidated long tables and benches in the kitchen have been used for many years, and some areas have been smoothed out. Leland sat in the corner by the door, holding a large bowl and toasting potatoes on black bread. Yesterday morning during dinner, someone stood in front of Leland and said he had taken someone else's seat. Today, everyone was smiling, and their eyes could make Leland feel goosebumps. There is a plate of sour bamboo shoots on the table, which have a strong taste but are very appetizing. In the northern part of the empire, various feudal lords and duchies would pickle food, and pickled bamboo shoots were considered a common side dish. From the feudal lords to the poor in the deep forests, there were several pickled dishes on the dining table. Putting down the big bowl, Leland remembered not taking the spoon for dinner. Suddenly, Leland popped out and sat across from the long table, handing Leland a spoon. Leland smiled and said, "Lengo, I saw you didn't take the spoon, so I took the handle for you." "Thank you," Leland smiled. Raven was one of the few who could talk to him, and 3 new recruits sat with them. Watching their bowls half full of stewed vegetables and a piece of black bread, Raven was munching and enjoying himself, not letting go of any soup. The shortage of supplies at the outpost has led to a significant reduction in the daily meals of the soldiers. In the past, they could still eat up to 80% full, but now this amount seems like a drop in the bucket. Leland stood up, broke his 2 pieces of black bread into several pieces, and divided them one by one along the long table. 2 more bowls were brought over, and half of the full stewed vegetables were distributed, along with 2 pieces of meat, to be handed to the middle of the long table. The new recruits looked at the black bread by the bowl, stopped chewing and looked up at Leland one by one. "Brother Leland, what are you?" Levin blinked his eyes and licked his lips. Leland curled his lips and said helplessly, "I can't eat so much alone. Let's share it together to save on waste." Seeing that everyone was just staring at the 2 bowls of stewed vegetables that were separated, and no one was the first to move the spoon, Leland urged, "Hurry up and eat, there will be a task later." Raven was very happy and picked up the piece of black bread next to the bowl. He smiled and said, "Thank you, Lengo. I'm not polite then." He picked up the stew in the bowl like a passing cloud and scooped a few spoonfuls from the middle bowl. The others looked at someone with a head and said, "Thank you, Lengo." The soldiers around the long table looked at the stewed vegetables and stewed meat, and couldn't help but crave, but they didn't feel embarrassed to come over. System prompt plus 4 points of devout faith value. Can this also increase the devout faith value? Leland was a bit surprised. Last night, Lei-Wen and the others added 3 points of devout faith to themselves. Today, it is triggered again, which means that devout faith can be repeatedly swiped from one person. No need for 50 people, as long as a few new recruits continue to respect themselves a few times, it can increase their piety value. Now that the devout value reaches 7 points, you are still 43 points away from receiving the devout reward. Sharing food and such a good thing, Leland couldn't even hold back the corners of his mouth. He had a bloody breakfast. Requesting votes for collection. This book has been submitted for signing, and the status will be changed in 2 days. Those who want to invest should hurry up. There is another chapter in the evening, end of this chapter. Chapter 6. Dialogue before leaving the outpost. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Dialogue before leaving the outpost. After breakfast, Levin and his companions were all members of the second team. They needed to leave the outpost and go to the Drakavald Forest outpost for patrol, and in some places they needed to be stationed for a period of time. The Berg outpost is divided into 2 teams rotating every week, each consisting of 3 sword and shield soldiers, 2 spearmen for crossbowmen, and 2 vanguard cavalry. When encountering an enemy, the patrol team will send a vanguard cavalry back to the outpost, and then the vanguard cavalry will report to the station troops in Bure town. When the number of enemies increases or unexpected situations occur, the 2nd Vanguard Cavalry of the patrol team will be immediately dispatched, alternating back and forth to ensure continuous updates of wartime intelligence. The Imperial Army has experienced wars of all sizes, and in terms of military coordination and arrangement, it is systematic. However, the deception and concealment of Imperial officials have led to many mistakes in military operations, such as untimely scheduling. Leland stood at one end of the outpost suspension bridge, watching a group of people pulling a carriage on the road in the distance, quickly heading towards the Drakavald forest. In the distance, Little Raven waved at him. A few minutes later, the patrol team completely disappeared into the forest. Every patrol is full of crisis, with countless beastmen and forest greens emerging one after another. Any slight mistake can lead to death in the Black Forest. The reason why several new recruits, including Leland, were transferred to Berg Outpost was because during the Northern Norse invasion in the spring, the beastmen of the Delkavald Forest took the opportunity to burn, kill, and loot, resulting in severe casualties at each outpost. There are rumors that on the day of the evil moon, some marginal villages in the north were destroyed, livestock and villagers disappeared, and even houses were crushed to powder. A survivor claimed to have seen a giant spider as huge as a church, but was later burned to death by a witch hunter tied to a stake, citing the public dissemination of chaotic rhetoric. When he turned back to the outpost, Leland noticed someone secretly observing him. He looked up and happened to meet the veteran Abat on the wall, who looked away lazily. For a month now, Leland has also noticed Abat's uniqueness. He speaks less, only does what he needs to do, is indifferent to everything he does, and is not afraid of anything. Moreover, Maz had a natural hostility towards Abat, and the two of them didn't communicate at all. Even a few skilled soldiers wouldn't provoke him. It is said that Abat is the oldest soldier in the Berg outpost, and Captain Toka used to be just a guard under a military noble. He came here shortly after the invasion of Nazca and was just transferred. Leland doesn't care who cares about him, as long as it doesn't affect him, he ignores everything. He is more concerned about how to make the appearance of the Heram hammer that was drawn last night legitimate. Transforming a war hammer out of thin air, claiming to be a blessing from Sigma to the public. If Leland did this, there might be witch hunters coming from afar the next day to take him away. Especially the dazzling magic, it is a hot torch. The forbidden magic within the Empire can be described as abnormal. If a child from a civilian family awakens their magical ability one night and controls a flame in front of their parents in a novel way, they will definitely be caught and burned to death. Lurin doesn't want to be fooled by the system at all. Without a reasonable explanation, the thing given by the system is a bomb that can explode at any time. One mistake can lead to social death within the Empire. There's a way. Leland came up with an idea. Find an opportunity to visit the town of Bure and use the Sigma Church for a divine grace, and the matter will be resolved. If you're lucky, you can still earn a big wave of devout values. With an idea in mind, Leland prepared to leave Berg Outpost. Captain Toka of the outpost is worrying in the second-floor wooden house. The weather in the north is low, and it's just autumn. In the early morning, the wilderness is covered in cold frost, and the only wooden window is also in disrepair. A few wooden boards are sewn and patched to barely keep the window from falling off, and light shines into the gloomy room from outside. In one fireplace of the room, flames were blazing as the firewood crackled. Toka leaned against the wooden chair and fiercely slammed the paper in his hand onto the table in front of him. Several paper drafts and a large number of receipts on the table flew up, and a bottle of imperial beer on the table was shaken and swayed. The scattered paper drafts are about outpost military expenses, food reserves, and more of Taka's own bonds. Damn a true offering, are you asking me to fill the hole in that 50 silver coins in just a few days? Losing 40 silver coins, you want me to send someone to pay off his debt? Dream. After speaking, Toka slammed the table angrily. Most of his wealth was invested in the chariot and horse business. The most popular professional group in the northern part of the empire, apart from the pastors of major churches, was undoubtedly the chariot and horse merchants. The climate of northern provinces is limited by economic development and commodity types. The people of the north struggle to meet their basic needs, while the people of the south live relatively affluent and safer lives. The Royal Academy of Aldorf once arranged imperial cities, with all the remaining cities located in the south, except for the main cities of the northern electors. This shows the gap between the north and the south. The chariot and horse merchants controlled a large number of caravans, transporting goods and selling goods between the north and south, while bringing new interesting events. They formed one chamber of commerce after another to divide the profits. The huge profits have attracted countless nobles to join, and ordinary people with some financial resources will invest in a certain chamber of commerce at the first time. Toka is one of the brainless leaks who blindly follow the trend, and the biggest risk is borne by them. The caravan he invested in last time was attacked by ogres in the wilderness of Aval, causing almost all of his goods to be lost and the guards to die completely. "Sir, what's wrong?" said the pioneer attendant outside the door, hesitating for a moment before pushing the door in. "It's none of your business. Get out." Toka waved impatiently, indicating that he was feeling restless. Lowering his head, Toka picked up a piece of paper and noticed that the pioneer cavalry was still standing there. He shouted, "What are you still standing there for? Didn't I let you out and hear me?" "Sir, Leland is here," said the pioneer cavalry. "Leland. What is he doing here?" Taka frowned. "That guy yesterday was incredibly imposing. Will he come to find him today?" The vanguard cavalry continued, "He said he has something to talk to you about and wants to talk to you face-to-face. Toka shouted angrily, "Let him go. Just say I'm not available." As soon as he finished speaking, Toka suddenly called out to the attendant outside the door, "Wait, did that guy say something was wrong?" "He said he wants to go to Bure town to do some things and also go to the church to pray," replied the voice outside the door. Toka squinted his eyes and pulled his beautiful mustache. "Let him in," he said. "Yes." Quickly, there was a creaking sound of wooden boards outside the room. After a moment, Leland pushed open the door and walked in. "Captain Taka," Leland nodded slightly. Toka glanced at the pioneer cavalry outside the door, who understood and moved lightly to close the door. "What are you doing leaving the outpost for Bure town?" Toka stared at Leland's face with a gloomy expression. Leland didn't show any evasion in his eyes and said calmly, "It seems that the officer doesn't have the right to understand the reason for personal matters, right? But soldiers have an obligation to answer their superiors' questions." Toka snorted coldly and said bluntly, "Leland, don't think that just showing off your authority yesterday is remarkable. There are many ways to make you disappear." "But I'm standing in front of you, Captain Taka," Leland retorted sharply, "living well." "Hum." Toka raised his mouth and poured himself a glass of beer. The white foam overflowed the mouth of the glass, and the smell of wheat was diffused in the room. Looking up and drinking a big glass, Toka comfortably leaned back in his seat, his elbow resting on the armrest. It's normal for young people to be arrogant, and every imperial general made mistakes when he was young. Marshal Kuiper has also disobeyed military orders once, he said. Leland frowned and understood the meaning behind the words, saying calmly, "I just can't see anyone bully me. Maz is lying in bed now, it's his own creation. I will handle Motsi's matter well, fair and just. Similarly, I can let you go to Bure town, but on one condition." Toka stood up, poured a black beer, and handed it out. Leland took the wooden wine glass and glanced at the foam in it. "Tell me, It's up to me whether or not I accept it, he said. I like to communicate with smart people, Lurin. Toka smiled and said confidently, there is a car dealer in Bure town who I owe him a little silver coin. Your condition is for me to kill. Forget it. No, Leland, you misunderstood me. Toka crossed his fingers and said word by word, go help me deliver a letter to him. I'll give you a small reward, 10 silver coins. What do you think? Giving so much money makes me feel uneasy, Leland warned. Is it very dangerous? People's quirks are always peculiar, Leland, Toka casually said. Rich people tend to do strange things to some extent, and some may sound abnormal. He scratched his head and paused for a moment, saying, I need the businessman you're looking for. He's unpredictable in his temper. The last guy who delivered my message, he broke his legs and threw it into the sewer. I've been looking for him for over a month. Later on, I found out that the unlucky guy had all his limbs broken and lay alone in the sewer, howling. It took him a long time to breathe, Toka shrugged and said. Leland frowned even tighter, you just don't care. Mind. Why should I mind? Toka seemed to have heard an interesting joke and grinned. If it weren't for him delivering a letter and securing supplies worth over 200 gold coins for over 100 people at 4 outposts, all the soldiers at our Berg outpost would have been slaughtered in the damn beast-man raid. The sentry officer sat down, took a sip of beer, and sighed, that unlucky guy is our hero. Leland's eyebrows darkened a bit, and he clenched his fists. He never expected such a heinous and vulgar thing to happen on the border of the Empire. You shouldn't sit here comfortably roasting the fire, Toka, the gallows are just tailor-made for people like you. Leland said in a low voice. The gallows. Haha. Toka couldn't help but laugh, lost his voice, and looked at Leland playfully without saying anything more. Do you know how much does an ordinary soldier's pension only cost? I'll tell you, it should not exceed this amount at most. As Toka spoke, he extended 3 fingers and continued, 30 silver coins, that's still the best situation. If those zombies above are even more greedy, and the families of those fallen soldiers can get 15 silver coins, they must be grateful to Sigma. Do you know how much compensation I gave to that unlucky guy? Toka paused and looked straight at Leland in front of him, gesturing for him to guess. Seeing Lurin remain silent, Toka extended his 4 fingers and said word by word, 40 gold coins, that's 400 silver coins, 4,000 copper coins. Is a human life worth only 40 gold coins to you? Leland didn't want to speak anymore. He couldn't help but want to catch the guy in front of him, who was dressed in monkey clothes, and beat him hard. I gave that guy's family money that they couldn't earn in 1, 2, or even 3 lifetimes. Isn't that enough? Toka tilted his head and asked in a questioning manner. The fireplace in the room was burning brightly, and a cold word dissipated the temperature. Leland, you're still young and have too little exposure to power. Toka looked up at Leland, waved his hand, and poured 2 more beers. When you climb to my position, you'll see a lot of things, everything has a price, faith, honor, and even life. Help me deliver this letter, I'll allow you to go to Bure town, can we make a deal? I'll give you 5 more silver coins, let's make a deal. This is my final condition, Toka paused. As for those Maz people, I'll take care of them. When you leave, I'll have them compensate and publicly apologize to the other recruits. To be honest, Leland didn't want to deliver this letter. Toka had already stated that there would be great risks, but he didn't agree with his request and couldn't leave the outpost himself. Escaping without permission is a capital offense. Give me 20 silver coins now, otherwise I'll give up going to Bure town. Toka hesitated for a moment and grinned, everyone has a price, let's make a deal. Leland held the letter and as soon as he walked out of the room, the system panel immediately popped out. Plus 30 experience points. Toka's remarks cannot be said to be completely wrong. The experience gained by a lower-level Imperial officer through much of his life struggle is somewhat reasonable. A little episode, Leland didn't feel sad, it was just a genuine resistance to such things. If faced with a choice in the future, would one choose interests and ignore human life? Leland can't say for sure. Making Motzi and a few others bow their heads and apologize to the new recruits will undoubtedly bring them a lot of devout values, and the 50-point devout value reward is getting closer and closer. After carrying all the money, putting on his military uniform, and wearing his weapons, Leland left Berg outpost and headed east. The soldiers stationed on the fence also received news and lowered the suspension bridge. Looking around, the village settlements faintly visible in the wilderness are mostly uninhabited wasteland, dense forests, swamps, and hills. Not long after leaving, a soldier moved out a traveling horse and chased after him, handing the reins to Leland. Leland held the reins in his hand and hesitated. For me, this is what a bait means. He told you to be careful all the way, the soldier said before turning around and running back to the outpost. A bait still has this right. Leland felt extremely surprised. On the wall of the distant outpost, a figure stood tall, and Leland knew that the person was staring at him. Everyone has some little secrets. He flipped over and mounted his horse, sat on the saddle, and ran along the east path. Request tickets and collect. The chapter was blocked yesterday and was not sent out in a timely manner, which has kept me busy with work until now. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Bure Town. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Bure Town. It has to be said that horseback riding is a very physically demanding task. After running around for a long time, Leland felt a pain in his hips. The scenery along the way was plain, and the construction of the imperial countryside was in a very backward state. Most of the villages we saw along the way were only surrounded by fences one by one. The conscripted militia stationed there were mostly listless and emaciated, and in the face of attacks from wild beasts, these defenders were in vain. The geographical location around the town of Bure is treacherous, so the land for cultivating crops is particularly precious, and the number of villages is much smaller than in the eastern hinterland. The economic development of the entire town of Bure is supported by a single stone mine and iron ore. Wherever there are mines, there will be dwarves. It is said that the number of mountain dwarves settling in Bure town exceeds 70, while the total number of people in this border town is only 1,300. Located close to the Dracovald forest, several logging farms on the outskirts of Bure town are doing well in business. The abundant resources of logs and giant timber always result in the lowest timber prices. Merchants choose to purchase a large amount of cheap timber from here and transport it to other cities to earn the price difference. After several hours of long-distance raids, Leland finally arrived at the town of Bure, which was the only imperial city that the indigenous Leland had ever seen. Compared to the ancient city that Leland remembers visiting, Bure town is still much smaller. From a distance, black smoke drifted up into the sky, and the general situation of the city could be clearly seen from its location. The wooden city walls blocked Leland's view, and the city gate, which was over 4 meters high, was built with stones. The thick gate opened inward, and the soldiers standing guard outside the city gate were equipped with equipment that was completely different from Leland's thin military uniform. The soldiers at the outpost were dressed in full-scale armor, with locks and helmets protecting their heads and necks. They held sharp spears and long halberds in their hands, and compared to the village militia who were yellow and thin, the soldiers in Bure town had healthier faces. A guard officer stood inside the post with a sword in one hand, his eyes sharp and constantly scanning passers-by. There were 2 long queues outside the city gate, and Leland dismounted, gripping the reins and following at the end of the queue. As it was almost Leland's turn, there was a loud noise coming from inside the city gate. It seems that there was a conflict between a group of mercenaries and a caravan. The leader of the mercenaries had a typical Northcar appearance, over 1.9 meters in size, with bulging muscles on both arms exposed, and 2 sharp short axes constantly reflecting cold light behind them. The two sides argued endlessly. Mercenaries are the most likely group of people to cause conflicts and conflicts. They take their lives for profit, and similarly, they are better at using their lives to gamble with anger when doing anything. The goods of your caravan are always escorted by our barbarian bear mercenary corps. Last time we encountered the green mushroom robber, how many good guys did we lose? We didn't even pay half a copper coin as compensation, so if we don't say a word, we'll switch to someone else to escort them. Have you asked my double axes if they agree? A few guards rushed over at the sound, and the city gate fell into a brief chaos. The conflict between the two sides escalated, as the leader of the Nazca mercenary threatened with a double axe, and both sides drew their weapons. As the sound grew louder, the leaders on both sides stood together, arguing with each other in a red face. Many city gate defenders also tilted their spears and halberds from upright positions, and several archers on the city wall also drew arrows. Put down your weapons immediately. Quickly leave the city gate. Otherwise, it will be dealt with according to the laws of the duchy. The guard shouted at both sides. Spread it out. Scatter them all. Step back. The guard soldiers walked back and forth, shouting loudly, constantly dispersing the dense crowd approaching here. The pedestrians queuing outside the city were also forced to retreat. Leland became interested and pulled his traveling horse, standing in place, looking inside the city gate with great interest. Shoo! A strange movement appeared, and in the standoff caravan, a caravan guard pulled a long bow as if trying to intimidate the other party. He shot an arrow at a stone slab in front of a mercenary, perhaps due to a problem with accuracy. The arrow was impartial and hit the base of the mercenary's thigh. The Norskers are all masters who are good at playing with their lives, with extremely manic temperaments. This mutation undoubtedly angered the entire wild bear mercenary corps. The mercenary leader of Northcar was immediately furious and charged forward with a straight punch, hitting the guard's door. The guard let out an "ah," and the kite flew backwards for a few meters. The other members of the wild bear mercenary regiment followed closely behind, while the passively defending caravans fell into a disadvantageous position in an instant. The guards were thrown upside down, and both sides engaged in a fierce hand-to-hand combat. The chief guard's face was very unpleasant, and he immediately ordered the guards, "Take them down." I had an impulse to act, but it was a real knife and gun attack, damaging several lives. At most, I was stripped of my position. If the situation escalated into unrestrained fighting involving civilians, how could I not be the chief guard? If such a thing happens during his custody, the Lord will definitely hold him accountable. He could only shout in vain, "Stop immediately! Stop immediately!" The chief guard dispatched soldiers to report to the Lord while dispatching city gate guards to surround both sides of the armed struggle to prevent the involvement of innocent civilians. Leland raised his eyebrows. Such a thing is rare, especially in the mercenary group composed of Norskers, which is very rare. The guards outside the city gate all ran inside to control the situation, and no one stopped outsiders from entering for a moment. The gathered crowd immediately surged up, just to see the truth. The bloody conflict was a popular scene among the people of the Northern Empire, especially in the military atmosphere of the Midden and Nord tribes. As an imperial soldier, Leland actually has an obligation to cooperate with the city gate defenders to stabilize the situation, maintain order, and protect the laws of the duchy. If he enters at this moment, it will only cause unnecessary trouble for himself, let alone a fight between the two sides. Leland suddenly remembered that there were several more tasks in the system, one of which was to discover a hero unit, quickly call up the system panel, this move that Leland has never used before, and focus on the unstoppable Northcar mercenary in the crowd. Name: Herek Fury Bear, Elite, Race. Northcar Race, Occupation. Berserker, Equipment. Heavy Strike Battle Axe, Dual-Wielded Weapon, Feature. Combat Fanaticism, get stuck in melee +5 melee, within range +3 melee on your own side, potential. 610, Good Guy. War Fanaticism Attribute. Not only do you give yourself melee bonuses, but also melee bonuses within your range. With the help of the system, Leland saw a faint red glow on the surface of the mercenary's skin. No wonder the mercenary group was caught in a stalemate, fighting more but not less. Hero task. Discovering one hero, completed, reward. Hero gift package, please check carefully. Hero task 2. Discovering 3 heroes, 1-3, Herek, a Northcar, became more and more brave as he fought. The guards around him were startled and retreated. Under the loud command of the commander, the guards looked embarrassed and placed their spearheads flat, making it difficult for them to move forward and gather in a circle. Inside the city gate, there was a commotion among the crowd, and only someone shouted loudly, "Captain Krill is here! Captain Krill is here!" Accompanied by a sound of neat footsteps, a team of Imperial swordsmen, all dressed in scales, quickly passed through the crowd, and the crowd quickly separated from the middle. At the forefront of the Imperial swordsman team, the leading officer rode a midden warhorse with sharp and angular faces, looking less than 40 years old. He wore thick half-body armor, a long sword pinned to his waist, 2 battle shields hanging from the warhorse, and a black combat robe worn outside. He was the highest officer in the defense of Bure town, Creel and Loxian. The younger brother of Lord Lev and Loxian of Bure town. In the name of Lord Lev, I command you to lay down your weapons. Krill drew out his long sword first, and his low voice echoed through the area. Leland felt as if this sound was roaring in his ear, causing his eardrums to ache. Another elite-level powerhouse. And their strength is far stronger than that of the Nosker mercenary leader. The chief guard saw the backbone of the city and boosted his morale, so he didn't worry about these mercenaries coming into chaos. More city gate guards gathered and pressed against him. The Northcar mercenaries were roared into confusion, and both sides of the conflict stopped fighting and slowly separated. Obviously, they were all afraid of the powerful Captain Krill. Many mercenaries showed signs of vigilance, while the mercenary leader Herek clenched his 2 axes with his back in his hand and looked at Krill with an unfriendly expression. The caravan guards also withdrew their weapons, and no one wanted to offend this lord's important minister. Seize their weapons. Guard all the city gates, tie them up. Hand them over to the lord for disposal. Creel cut off the railway with his nails, his eyes wandering around the leaders of both sides causing trouble. Under the pitiful gaze of the merchant, the city gate guard took away the caravan and all the goods on board for safekeeping. If the merchant wanted to exchange this batch of goods again, it wouldn't be a big loss, and they were afraid that this batch of goods would have to be thrown in Bure town. The city gate guard stepped forward to collect the weapons of the mercenaries. Most of the mercenaries in the group were the barbaric Northcars from the north, so they were naturally not convinced. However, when they saw Herek snort and hand over his double axe, the mercenaries had to follow suit one after another. After Krill learned about the situation, the highest officer in the city defense determined that the merchant had taken the initiative and was mainly responsible for the whole matter. The barbarian bear mercenary army blocked the road, disrupted the order of Bure town, and took secondary responsibility. They compensated the injured gatekeepers with 20 silver coins, and the merchant paid the majority, leaving the rest to Herek and the others. More matters need to be handed over to Lord Lev for trial. The crowd blocked outside the city gate was dispersed by the gatekeeper and reorganized into a long line. After the recent upheaval, the soldiers became even more strict in checking pedestrians passing by. When it was Leland's turn, the gatekeeper looked at him several times in a row. While the soldiers in front of him were repeatedly flipping through his waist tag, Leland silently handed out a silver coin, took a step closer, and whispered, "Is the motorhome in Bure town fully booked?" The latter calmly looked around, took the silver coin, rubbed it in his hand, and confirmed that it was the real silver coin. He couldn't help but smile and whispered, "There are still a few rooms left. The Felda family has made a few new bottles of honey wine, go and try it." Subsequently, the gatekeeper lifted his long spear and allowed Laron to pass. There are many inns and taverns in Bure town. The weather in the northern duchy of the empire is always cold, and free people and a small number of farmers like to gather in a noisy tavern during their free time, drink a cheap barley wine, and the alcohol acts on their heads, then they start chatting incessantly, and talking about women. They prefer the latter option. The Flying Car Inn in Bure town is a place where imperial soldiers and some unknown rangers often stay. The drinks here are usually 1 or 2 copper coins cheaper than other places, and the water is also acceptable, but these are not the main reasons for hotel guests. The Flying Car Inn is a whitewashing shop, commonly known as a sales hub. Every day, people of unknown origin or people enter the hotel gate with goods of unknown origin. These are not reasons why Leland wants to go either. In my original memory, Leland had never been to a motel before. Although he had a timid personality, he liked to stare at the tavern maids who were busy all day in the motel, wearing cool and fitting dresses, and their buttocks were as round and perky as peaches. Every time someone beats me out, I stay at the door and don't leave. Other memories are not profound, only these are remembered. The personality of the indigenous people, Lurin, is not very good, just a mature and immature person. Leland originally wanted to stay at a hotel for one night. It's also a place to stay, and some places can satisfy the eye. Why not go? Entering the city wall, Middenling's buildings are unique, and looking around, the low houses in Bure town are arranged in an orderly manner, forming blocks. Leland rode a traveling horse and quickly rushed to the buzzing hotel. The main roads in the east, west, north, and south run through the entire town of Bure. There are many shops and 2-story houses on both sides of the road, and only a few people dressed in gorgeous clothes ride horses and parade through the market. There are many trucks on the road, and merchants transport goods from Bure town to other villages and towns for sale. The buzzing hotel looks like a fortress from a distance, located on one side of the main road at the southern end of Bure town. A 2-meter-high black stone wall surrounds the hotel, and there is also a wooden watchtower here. The guards hired in the hotel can stand in the tower, monitoring the approaching carriages and all incoming passengers, or patrol the approaching soldiers. The hotel is divided into 2 levels. A hotel and a tavern, with 2 large gates, Pegasus, and passengers, leading from the outer courtyard to 2 inner courtyards and the relatively safe and warm main building of the hotel. Between the 2 gates, the bustling kitchen and pantry connected the 2 parts of the hotel together. Inside the passenger door guarded by a gatehouse, there is a bar and a private room for exclusive gatherings. When there is no carriage to visit, the bar appears large and empty, but it can also be crowded during busy holidays. Connected to it is a storage room that leads down to a fully equipped cellar, which can also be accessed from a slope in the winery opposite the delivery entrance at the back of the hotel. The distinctive feature of the Buzz Hotel is honey wine, which uses honey collected from 3 beehives at the back of the courtyard as raw material. The taste of barley is mixed with the sweet honey, and it is said that several bottles of honey wine can often be seen on Lord Leaf's table. The carriage door leads to an inner courtyard, which has 3 stable areas for customers, private customers, and caravan horses. Entering the hall, the passengers almost filled up all the available seats here, and the hot atmosphere made the hotel floor very noisy. Everyone drank and had fun, and 3 tavern maids wandering in the crowd were busy spinning around like butterflies. Occasionally, bold people wiped oil, and they all laughed and scolded them, knocking out their outstretched hands. Request tickets and collect. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Buzzing Tavern. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Buzzing Tavern. Wooden tables and chairs were arranged haphazardly, and the entire floor of the hotel looked like a chaotic gathering place, filled with all kinds of people. People communicate freely in the hotel, drinking imperial beer, and the bar is full of people. People always complain about the recent instability in the Northern Empire, the poor business routes, and so on. Boss Felda Gratz and his wife Jolie run this buzzing hotel. Felda is a Southern Rick leader with a clear attitude and shrewd judgment. He is responsible for handling business transactions and rarely sees Felda not frowning. In contrast, Jolie, as her name suggests, always wears a smile on her face. Her loud laughter echoes throughout the hotel. She manages the bar and deals with customers, and her harsh Nordic accent always becomes a source of joy for many passing travelers. In the kitchen, separated by a curtain, two chefs were busy, the fireplace was burning brightly, and pots of thick broth kept being brought from the kitchen into the hall. In the center of the hall, the roasted whole lamb on the bonfire grill is steaming, and the meat smell is constantly wafting in the hotel. The bard who often lives in the hotel is playing his sandchord, which is clear and cheerful, infecting everyone, and the ladies' faces are also slightly drunk red. No one would refuse a hearty relaxation. In the middle of the hotel, a few people were gathered by the campfire, dancing the unique tap dance of the north to the sound of the piano. Around the table, drinking alcohol, the faces of the travelers kept smiling, and they raised their glasses and cheered loudly for the dancers. Leland saw an empty table at the corner of the hall and walked over quietly, putting down the package behind him. Soon, a maid walked towards him. The maid, dressed in revealing clothes and with a fiery figure, glanced at Leland's military uniform and didn't pay attention. The buzzing hotel never lacked soldiers to patronize, and some guests saw Captain Clare occasionally appearing in the private area, drinking alone. "Serve you, warrior," the maid smiled and bent down her slender waist, deliberately revealing the spring light on her collar, dripping coquettishly. "I need a fourth-class room and a dinner," Leland said with a smile as he just glanced at the maid. Holding his hands on the table, the maid saw that Leland's gaze did not linger at all, and immediately became interested in the old soldier in the military uniform in front of her. She handed over a parchment menu and asked, "Are you alone? We don't have many empty rooms." In the past, when she did this, some guests seemed to have taken away their souls and would give more than 10 copper coins as tips. "I'm the only one." Leland ordered 2 pieces of black bread, a large glass of rye beer, and a portion of broth, then took out 2 silver coins from his pocket and handed them to the maid. "These should be enough to pay, and the rest will be your tip, beautiful lady." "Oh, thank you." The maid smiled coquettishly at Leland, and after deducting the cost of accommodation and dinner, there was at least 1 silver coin left. Such a good thing is not often seen. As soon as she turned around, the curved corners of her mouth became frivolous. "Oh, another lascivious guy." Leland didn't know the maid's evaluation of him in her heart, so she opened the package and took out the letter, putting it close to her. What he has seen can be said to be insightful, and if he can't resist the temptation, he can only say that he has seen very little. Only young and energetic boys would have such impulsiveness, and the former Leland, who was over 30 years old in mind, had experienced everything that needed to be experienced and was not so thirsty in this area. The reason why he gave a large tip was also to cover up his ears. From the moment he walked into the hotel, Leland noticed that someone was staring at him. No one would believe a spirited imperial soldier who has no reaction when faced with a woman wearing revealing clothes. Either he hides well or he is not a man. But with his generous gestures, Leland appeared like a naive and foolish person. Sure enough, my gaze on myself disappeared. Quickly, the maid brought a wooden sign to Leland, which was a proof of stay with the room number engraved on it. She turned around and went to the kitchen to fetch dinner for Leland, handed over the utensils, and then left. Black bread is freshly baked, still warm and soft in texture. Leland tore 2 pieces of black bread into pieces and soaked one of them in a large bowl of broth. To his right, there are several guys dressed like adventurers, loudly discussing the war that will take place in the Nordic region this spring. The transportation between towns in the medieval world was inconvenient, and information transmission was also very difficult. The lower-class people were curious about the outside world, and an adventurer noticed that people around him were raising their ears to listen to what they were saying. He couldn't help but shout loudly, "The guys in front of me saw such a big war mammoth, they all wet their pants. Isn't that right?" When the giant beast raised by the Yankees charged up, it was really deadly. The Yankees' long boats are at least 2 burgher castles in size. The others at the table agreed. Leland listened to the adventurers' loud discussion and silently ate dinner. I am very clear about what happened at this point in time. In the spring of 2502 in the imperial calendar, the number of Norse raiders, far exceeding 20,000, invaded the northern Nordic and Ostend territories of the empire, and the war situation deteriorated. Even now, the rural roads of Nordic territories are still filled with the figures of Norse raiders. From the perspective of the outcome of the war and losses, the empire suffered a devastating defeat, with the North Koreans earning blood. It was not until a year later that the emperor led his army north to support the Nordic Empire and completely drove away the invading North Koreans. A few adventurers stopped discussing this topic, and Leland noticed that on the table on the other side of the hotel, several Nazca mercenaries raised their heads and stared fiercely at them. The adventurer then continued to stare at the hot maids wandering in the crowd, chatting about some monotonous topics. Just as some imperialists believe in cults, not all Norse people believe in chaotic evil gods. There are always exceptions, but only a small proportion. 200 years ago, Emperor Ludwig, the savior of the empire, showed great tolerance towards naturalized Norse people. They are often seen along the northern coast of the empire, and the reason why these Norse people deviate from the chaotic evil gods is simple, mostly because they think those 4 evil gods are stupid. After dinner, Leland wiped the corner of his mouth and was about to pick up the package and go upstairs. But he noticed that Jolie, the owner of the buzzing hotel, had brought a glass of wine and was walking towards him with a swaying yellow and green dress. The owner's wife may be over 40 years old, but overall she was well maintained. She smiled and said, "Brave soldier, would you like a cup of freshly brewed honey wine? It has a rich and sweet taste, guaranteed to satisfy you." As he spoke, he handed the plate to Leland. "I'm afraid I don't have any extra money to pay for this honey wine. Ask other customers, there will definitely be customers who want to taste it." Leland stood up and draped the package across his shoulder, reaching out to politely decline. The landlady's smile deepened a bit and she continued, "Oh, you are a distinguished second-class guest, you can taste this glass of wine for free." Second-class guests. Leland hesitated for a moment, then looked at a maid in the crowd and understood something. The latter had just finished pouring drinks for the guest and noticed Leland's gaze. He stood up straight and gave him a charming smile from a distance. "What's wrong? Didn't you book a second-class room, guest?" said the landlady, with an unchanged smile. "Oh, I made a mistake." Leland withdrew his gaze and took the glass of honey wine from the plate, the amber liquid shaking the fireplace. "It's a second-class room. May Uric bless you, kind lady. You're still the first guy to call me madam, your mouth is so sweet." "I wish you a pleasant stay, esteemed guest," said Jolie, the boss lady, with a smile. She turned around and left. "I have a question for madam," Leland called out to Jolie. "Well, please speak without hesitation. Do madam know about a true offering, the merchant?" The landlady in front of her fell silent for a while and asked with some alertness, "What are you doing with Offren?" "Someone asked me to deliver a letter to him, and I need to hand it over to him myself." Leland raised an eyebrow, blinked his eyes, and pretended to know nothing. Jolie looked up and down at Leron, her eyes complex as she looked at his military uniform. Suddenly, she asked, "Are you a soldier from the West Drakavald Forest Garrison outpost? Captain Taka can't be your commander, can he?" Leland said with a difficult expression, seeming to be conflicted about whether or not to say it. "I know." The landlady Jolie smiled, paused, and said casually, "Young soldier, I advise you to give up this mission and go back earlier, otherwise you will regret coming here. Orphan is not as kind as I am. Believe me, you wouldn't want to know him." After listening to the boss's words, Leland hung his head and said dejectedly, "But I need to deliver this letter, otherwise the officer will deduct all my money for the second half of the year." After staying comfortably here for a night, hurry up and leave Bure town tomorrow morning. Life is much more important than the money in the second half of the year, young soldier. Jolie didn't want to say anything more and twisted her waist before leaving. Leland habitually squinted his eyes and quickly weighed the pros and cons in his heart. The guests at the buzzing hotel come and go in black and white, and things big and small happen from time to time. It is reasonable to say that the landlady cannot be so afraid of a businessman. Unless the latter has great financial power, relying solely on influence is enough to deter others. I really want to visit this Offran. Leland rubbed his chin and had a plan in his mind. September 17, 2052 in the imperial calendar. Good morning, esteemed guest. Your breakfast is ready. Do you need to bring it in? A gentle knocking sounded outside the room, and only guests who have booked a second-class room can enjoy the delivery service. In the morning, the sunlight shone through the sunny window and shone on the man on the blanket bed. With a face full of heroism, he took a deep breath and opened his eyes. His package and a wooden wine glass were placed on the low cabinet by the bedside. It has to be said that the honey wine at the buzzing hotel has a really good taste. The amber wine has a sweet and malty aroma, and it helps with sleep. This is the most comfortable sleep that Leland has ever had in the middle world. However, the sound insulation effect of the room was not very good. In the middle of the night, a sound of men panting and women shouting came from the neighboring room, which slightly affected Leland. Thank you for your hard work, let's bring it in. Leland stretched lazily, then lifted the bedding and quickly put on his clothes. Wearing soldier uniforms in the town of Bure was too eye-catching, and the blue and white colors did not match the main color scheme of the entire town. Instead, he changed into casual clothes made of cotton and linen. The door pushed open, and a hotel staff member walked into the room with a plate in his hand, feeling a bit reckless. He almost fell, but fortunately the plate did not tip over. After placing the prepared breakfast on the wooden table in the room, the hotel clerk leaned slightly and was about to leave when Leland asked, "What time is it now?" Around 6:30, guest." At 6:30, Leland pondered and asked the hotel staff, "Is the pastor of Sigma Church in Bure still old Zeiss?" "It's still him, our boss said that guy doesn't have much connections and can only be a pastor stationed in a small church in this area in the future." The hotel clerk finished speaking and leaned over to bring the door. After the hotel staff left, Leland pushed open the sunny window and looked out at the scene. On the street opposite the hotel, the light was still somewhat dim, and the crowds gradually increased. The whole town began a new day of life, and people had to work hard for the new plan. After finishing breakfast, Leland walked downstairs alone to the lobby of the hotel, with the package slanted across the back. A few assistants and hotel maids were cleaning the tabletop and floor. Garbage was piled up in one place and then placed in a round bucket, lifted by two sturdy men and transported out of the hotel through a small door. "Young soldier, you woke up so early." Xiao Li, the middle-aged owner of Sun Yang, sat alone behind the bar, wiping the neatly arranged wine glasses. When she saw Lai Luan coming downstairs, she smiled and said. Leland nodded politely, ordered a glass of ale, sat in the seat next to the bar, and casually asked, "Where's Boss Felda? Why didn't you see him?" The landlady gave a white glance and complained as she took out a bottle of ale from the wine rack behind her, filled a glass, and handed it to Leland. "That dead man is busy buying goods again. There have been quite a few customers in the past few days, and the food reserves in the kitchen warehouse are not enough. Felda has been dragging his two assistants around all day, feeling comfortable. He has left all the dirty and tiring work to me. Boss's business is booming." Leland smiled and took a big sip of ale, savoring the mellow aroma between his lips and teeth. "I barely have a meal to eat, and the only thing that keeps me busy all day in the hotel is just a few pieces of black bread. I also have to deal with those lord soldiers under my command. One more son and one less son are not considered prosperous." Seeing that the bottom of Leland's cup was empty, Jolie smiled and asked, "Another cup?" "Forget it, I don't have many copper coins on me. If I drink it again, I'll have to drink from afar," Leland joked as he took out 2 copper coins from his pocket and placed them on the bar. The landlady grabbed 2 copper coins and put them into the money box. She got up and leaned over to Laron's position. Laron could smell the perfume on her nose. Jolie bent over, leaning her arms against the bar, her tight collar wrapped around a huge bulge, and she weighed heavily on the countertop. "Do you still have to go deliver that letter?" She tilted her head, revealing her fair neck in a playful tone. "Of course," Leland calmly met her gaze without looking askance. After a moment, the landlady spoke up and said, "Your performance sets off a seasoned, young soldier who doesn't fit your age." Jolie sat down again and wiped Leland's glass, saying, "I intentionally gave the maid an extra tip yesterday to cover her up. Am I right?" Lurin remained silent, nodded, and slowly reached for the dagger at his waist. Many people had disappeared from the buzzing hotel. The landlady raised her hands, indicating that there was no threat to Leland, and smiled politely, "The guest is here. I don't want to get involved in your affairs too much. This big hotel is already busy enough for me. If I have to deal with a few more things, my mind won't keep up. I just want to remind you to run earlier before Offren gets angry, maybe you can survive." Another glass of ale. 2 copper coins were struck on the countertop, and Leland's expression remained calm. Quickly, a glass of ale was handed to the bar. After taking the glass, Leland looked up and froze, then turned around and walked out of the hotel gate, saying, "Thank you for your reminder, Mrs. Jolie. Request tickets and collect. Thank you to the book friends for their tips." End of this chapter. Chapter 9-9. Legendary Heroes Worth 10 Silver Coins. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9-9. Legendary Heroes Worth 10 Silver Coins. In Bure Town, there has always been a unique place, which is the Sigma Church backed by the Eastern Vulture Mountain. As a devout Anglican believer, Leland often went to church to worship and enjoy communion. When the church needed help, Leland would also join without expecting anything in return. The Sigma Church is located far from the hustle and bustle of the town center, where people can clearly feel a sense of calmness. Countless stones have built this church, with a golden semi-circular dome reflecting sunlight and shining brightly. In the center hangs a symbol of imperial authority, a weapon personally used by the founding Emperor Sigma, the Golden Hammer, Galmalaz. Although the northern part of the empire mostly worships the god of the White Wolf, Uruk, and there is also a White Wolf temple on the west side of Bure Town, there is no apparent conflict between the two religions. Each Sigma church has at least one secular pastor stationed, and the number of attendants and apprentices is relatively fixed. The only thing clergy need to do is to uphold the teachings of the Church of Justice. Strictly punish all crimes, correct all errors, investigate all truths, take justice and law as the criteria, uphold human justice, punish those who violate discipline and law, spread civilization and rational enlightenment, and pursue justice and justice for life. The current resident pastor of the Sigma Church in Bure Town is Zeiss, an elderly man over 100 years old. There are about 20 clergy and 10 holy warriors stationed in the church, and there are over 600 believers in Bure Town, which is somewhat competitive with the White Wolf Church. Leland rode a traveling horse, with the military uniform and some miscellaneous items in his package behind him. He flipped over and dismounted in front of the church door. He looked up at the emblem pattern in the center of the building, and there was a long line stretching for 100 meters at the entrance of the church, with the end of the line reaching the nearest block. There is still some time before the morning classes for the clergy, but the communion that wakes up early every day is arranged in advance on a long row of tables next to the church door. 6 holy warriors wearing scales and more than 10 attendants stand by the long line, maintaining order. "Brother attendant, could you please take a message with Pastor Zeiss for me?" Leland walked to the door and said to the attendant on duty. The latter looked up and down at the man in front of him and nodded. "What words?" Just say. Leland came to find him. Okay. The guard monk signaled to Leland to wait for a while, then turned around and walked towards the church. In a state of boredom, Leland looked at the paladins, most of whom were abandoned infants or orphans who were sent to the church at a young age and raised by priests and paladins until they reached adulthood. They were trained into the armed forces of the church and played a huge role in protecting the church and fighting against evil. The White Wolf Church also raises abandoned infants and orphans, and those fierce and fearless White Wolf cultivators are even more violent than the Yankees in battle. However, people's stereotypical impression of the clergy of the Imperial State Church is that they have big bald heads that are enough to blind the enemy's eyes. This is actually incorrect. Only clergy who truly grant church authority or have church badges, and abide by the corresponding regulations of shaving their heads, can continue to grow and braid their hair without anyone caring. But often when you do this, some witch hunters will doubt whether you are a follower of lust. Oh. Leland kid. How long haven't you been here? A voice full of joy and surprise rang out, and Reverend Zeiss from Bree Town Parish walked out of the church, his bald head very eye-catching, with a sincere smile on his aged and somewhat weathered face. He reached out to pull Leland's arm and looked at it real. Oh, my body is much stronger. In 2 years, it will be comparable to the Honor Guard group. Why did you think of coming to see me? Old Zeiss was dressed in a plain white robe, with a sacred emblem pendant and a cross pattern on his chest that looked very devout. I got a leave from the chief. I used to run to you a lot before, so I just wanted to do morning classes here to make up for it. Leland chuckled and pinched the old pastor's shoulder. Are the injuries here better? Look at your strong body, you can still serve as a pastor for at least 20 years. Pastor Zeiss's expression slightly froze, and a hint of decadence flashed in his eyes. In an instant, he smiled again and said, "It's all good. It would be even better if you could come and become a trainee pastor with me." Zeiss signaled and the attendant led Laron's traveling horse to the stable, and then Laron followed the old pastor towards the church. Along the way, Leland told the old pastor about what had happened at Berg outpost, and he focused on how he had beaten up those soldiers. When he heard Maz being chased by Leland's hammer, old Zeiss laughed and said, "Ha ha ha, you used to be timid, but now that you've grown up, it's not in vain for me to teach you." The relationship between Leland and the old pastor used to be similar to that of forgetting old friends, getting to know each other in 2 ways, and Leland's literacy skills were also taught by Zeiss. The old pastor is stationed in the town of Bree and is very kind to people and people. The nearby believers have a good impression of him. I see there are several new faces outside the door, all of whom have been recently recruited. Leland turned to look at the church's external team and said, "It took you a lot of energy just to feed these people. Let's not talk about this." The old pastor waved his hand and said, "There have been too many wars between Nord and Oster in the past 2 years. The churches in the north have been completely burned down, and the Norse raiders have taken everything they could." Zeiss stopped along the long corridor and looked at Vulture Mountain. The church's wealth has shrunk, and the tithes have greatly decreased. However, the number of clergy has increased instead of decreasing. In the past, a village church would have 1 apprentice pastor, but now it has to have 3 or even 4. The number of clergy in my parish has doubled within a year. The north is already not abundant, and the pressure is on us. If we don't have enough money, we can endure it. Normal morning classes are good, but there is such a big gap in food that we cannot fill. If we stop the Eucharist, not to mention winter, or late autumn, we don't know how many people will starve to death. But if we don't stop the Eucharist, the clergy, holy warriors, and attendants in the church will have to go hungry. Let's transfer some people to the southern diocese to share the pressure, but there hasn't been any result on the church side. The old pastor sighed, and these things can only be told to a few people around him. They are usually kept in their hearts. Leland could only advise him to relax and focus on dealing with the current situation first. With such a big matter, he was willing to help but lacked the ability. Walking along the long corridor outside the church, the two chatted a lot, including the mobilization of the garrison soldiers from Bure town to the western military camp. The old pastor predicted that there might be a new round of war to clear the beast men in the autumn, and he asked Leland to prepare early. At this moment, Leland noticed a black-robed attendant crouching in the nearby grass, which was difficult to find without careful examination. The attendant was holding a large book in his hand, flipping through pages, with two bound books still under his arm. Leland gave Zeiss a glance, and the latter stood still, watching Leland slowly approach the grass. The black-robed attendant monk's senses were very sensitive. He seemed to realize that someone was approaching behind him, quickly closed the book in his hand, and turned around suddenly to punch him backwards. A monk didn't attend morning classes, but instead hid here to read, either as a book thief or with ulterior motives. Leland reacted quickly and turned to avoid the punch, tightly gripping the monk's wrist with his palm. "I don't have it," the black-robed attendant retorted loudly. From his appearance, he appears to be much younger than Leland, around 17 or 18 years old. The black-robed attendant monk saw that his hand was clamped down, and without hesitation, he immediately lifted his leg and swept towards Laron's waist. Leland's melee ability has been systematically enhanced, with 2 points. Melee Apprentice and Defense Apprentice, making him more than capable of handling ordinary fist and foot attacks. Leland suddenly pulled him forward and, taking advantage of the monk's floating footsteps, his limbs became unbalanced for an instant, and he stumbled over with a leg. When the attendant monk feels unwilling and still wants to get up and fight back, the old pastor Zeiss shouted loudly, "Stop it!" The black-robed attendant stood up nimbly, immediately turned around and bowed to Zeiss, then stood still. "Luther Huss. Why don't you go do morning classes at this time?" Zeiss recognized the black-robed attendant and frowned as he saw 3 books lying on the grass. These books were secretly taken out of the church again. Hussey just hung his head and remained silent, which could be considered as acquiescence. The old pastor walked to the grass and picked up the 3 books, completely oblivious to Leland's surprised expression as he opened his mouth wide. The old pastor read the titles of The Sigma Biography, Reflections on the Essence of Faith, and The Meaning and Empire of the Church. The wrinkles on his forehead grew deeper, and as expected, many parts of the 3 books were marked with pens, and some blank pages were even filled with questions. Luther Huss. What did I tell you last time? The old pastor valued books very much, and every book in the church was kept as intact as possible. Zeiss would promptly repair any missing pages. These are all theological materials that can only be used by senior students, and can only be learned by novice priests. Luther Huss is still just a monk. The more crucial question is, how could he recognize the special vocabulary in long, dry and difficult to understand sentences on these theological materials? Can you even ask insightful questions? Luther Huss seemed somewhat conflicted and remained silent. Repeat what I said before. Immediately. The old pastor didn't want to clarify these issues at this moment. The attendant in front of him could hold up a good student, but he didn't pay much attention to following order in his work and always avoided some so-called tedious procedures. For example, when taking a book from the church, Rotherus never made a prior agreement with Zeiss, let alone scribbling on the book. The attendant realized his mistake and dared not look up. "If you steal books from the church again, you will drive me out." The old pastor spoke in a noncommittal tone and loudly said, "Now, immediately. Immediately. Go back to your room and tidy up all your things for me. After morning class, leave the church for me. You are not allowed to take any further steps." Leland would be foolish to listen while standing on the side. This is Ruth Huss. Only such a fierce man has appeared in the history of the Empire's sudden growth. One day later, within the territory of the Empire, with an unparalleled power of faith, countless chaotic sects were crushed, countless imperial people were protected, and the tough men who almost mercilessly eradicated heresy with unshakable will. This little bald guy even kicked many pastors suspected of corruption to death. He was so determined to take action against his colleagues that more than one diocese bishop demanded his expulsion from the church, but he was unconditionally protected by a larger bald man, Walker the Heartless. Are you going to drive him out of the Sigma Church? This nature is almost equivalent to a little godfather of the British Catholic Church, who wants to expel the Empress and one of God from the church. Leland quickly called up the system panel and stared at the attendant monk to avoid being a fake with the same name and surname. Name: Ruther Huss, legend, race. Human race, occupation. Sigma Church attendant monk, equipment. None, features. Faith barrier, within range +5 melee defense +4 morale, not awakened, indomitable faith, within influence .4 corruption +2 order, not awakened, potential. 8-10, favorite impression. May 10th, neither salty nor light, congratulations to the host for discovering rare heroes, Hero Mission 2.23, Rare Hero. Legendary quality. The hero discovered by Leland yesterday, Norsk mercenary Herek, is just an elite quality. With this move, Ruther Huss skipped the 3 levels of ordinary, elite, and fine peck. Never let this kid run away. Whatever you say, you have to stay. Leland knows the old pastor's tough temper, and in the absence of anyone to persuade him, he will definitely persist in what he sees right. Hey, Zeiss, this is a bit excessive. Leland quickly dissuaded and grabbed Ruther Huss' arm, saying earnestly, are these 3 books, what Sigma biography, and what Essence of Faith and Empire, all of which are what this monk is currently learning. The old pastor's beard trembled with anger and his tone was full of anger, saying, he has read 3 books, and only novice pastors are qualified to learn them, all of which belong to senior theology textbooks. How old is this to understand these things? Leland had a ghostly expression and turned his head to look at Ruther Huss. The latter still lowered their head without any reaction. If such a servant monk who loves learning stays in the church, he will still shine for the church and save the people of the empire in the future. It's not much better than driving him away directly. Thinking of the blazing and dazzling life story of Ruther Huss after that, Leland could only think of the word, glowing and heating, to describe it. The old pastor remained expressionless and silent. Let's do it this way, Leland thought of a solution. I'll guarantee him, and if such a thing happens again, I'll compensate you with 10 silver coins, Leland. Deal. The old pastor made a big U-turn and left the grass with his back in his hand. The church is running out of money, so you should pay for this one first. Leland only had 17 silver coins left all over his body, and now he lost 10 coins. Before he could deliver the letter, he was going to die of poverty. Leland gritted his teeth and said, for Ruth Huss, for this legendary quality hero, 10 silver coins are worth it. Seeking tickets for collection, seeking rewards. Thank you to the book enthusiasts for their tips. Book enthusiasts who are interested in this book can join AQ group. 959553208, end of this chapter. Chapter 10. The Hidden Chaos Sect. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. The Hidden Chaos Sect. Reluctantly and unwillingly, Loren took out a handful of silver coins and carefully counted out 10, then turned his head and handed them to the old pastor. It's very expensive to maintain books. This guy has ruined several of my books. I'm sorry that he didn't accept them. Zeiss shook his white beard and smiled. He said solemnly to the gray-robed attendant beside him, this time it's Leland who protects you. There's another time, no mercy. Do you understand? Yes, teacher, Ruther Huss breathed a sigh of relief. Don't you thank them yet? As a servant monk, I have forgotten all the rules of speech and behavior. The old pastor hummed and reminded. No need, no need. Leland smiled and waved his hand. Hurry up and do morning classes, it's almost time. Being able to relate to such a future legendary hero would make Leland laugh out of his dreams. The grey-robed attendant monk did not leave, facing Leron with a firm gaze. He bowed solemnly and said in a loud voice, "Thank you, Your Excellency Leron." The old pastor standing aside waved his hand and said, "Hurry up and copy the doctrine 10 times today as punishment." "Yes. Also." The old pastor stopped him and handed over the book in his hand. "Bring these 3 books and come to my prayer room on Sunday." Ruther Huss widened his eyes and looked at Reverend Zeiss, as if he had received a great reward. "If you answer a question that doesn't satisfy me, you won't be able to rest on Sundays in the future," Zeiss said sternly. "Yes." Watching the grey-robed attendant monk leave at the end of the church corridor, Leland couldn't recall for a long time and couldn't help but feel a sigh in his heart. As a attendant monk, Ruther Huss had such a resolute attitude and displayed a calm personality everywhere. No wonder he would become a prophet-level figure in the Sigma Church in the future. The personality of heroes is always different from ordinary people. With their innate temperament, they are born leaders. "Leland, what's wrong with you? You feel sorry for those silver coins." The old pastor stepped forward and patted Leland's shoulder, jokingly saying, "These money are just what I borrowed from you. I'll repay you when I come back later." "No need," Leland shook his head. "It's a deposit, it's a deposit. I always think this attendant monk will be very powerful in the future." "Where did you see it?" Zeiss asked in confusion. Leland almost revealed the system's secret. Fortunately, the old pastor didn't pay much attention and immediately changed his tone, saying, "I saw his intuition at first glance, and his name seems to have been heard somewhere." "His name, that's true." Zeiss nodded and the two continued walking along the corridor towards the inside of the church. Last winter, this child stood alone at the church entrance on a cold and rainy night, the old pastor recalled. Later, the patrolling samurai discovered him and brought him in front of me. At that time, this child was wearing a single coat, wearing tattered linen pants, soaked all over, and trembling. I asked him, "What are you doing standing at the church door?" and he said, "I want to read." I have never seen a 16 or 17-year-old child with a sharp look in his eyes, so he was left in the church to become a monk. The old pastor smiled silently and said, "Now it seems that we shouldn't have taken in this child at that time. It would be great to send him to the White Wolf Church and become a White Wolf cultivator." "What about his name?" "Ruther Huss, did you give him that name?" Leland asked. "Of course not, he chose it himself." The old pastor pushed open the small door at the end of the hallway and continued, "It's not convenient to call him a monk, so let him choose his own name. Who knew this little guy found the Sigma Church biography from my bookshelf and combined the names of 2 reformed popes, Adelaide Luther and Boris Huss. Is it a reformer?" Leland thought of the future actions of Ruther Huss. Fate really likes to joke. The long queue at the door orderly entered the church, and everyone in the queue received a small piece of bread and a bowl of porridge. These are the holy meals freely distributed by the church to show the care of the state religion for the people. Other churches also have corresponding practices, such as the charity goddess Selena Church in Bure town, which extracts several impoverished patients every month and provides them with free treatment. Entering the church, one can see the 5-meter-tall statue of the human emperor, Sigma, wearing a golden crown and wielding the powerful arm of the divine hammer, Gale Malas, to intimidate all enemies who invade the empire. Countless sacred objects and offerings are placed in front of the statue. Every year on Sigma Day, the imperial people spontaneously go to the nearby Sigma Church to bathe in the baptism of their souls with the most devout faith. Leland stood at the farthest end of the aisle, watching the old pastor Zeiss spread out his hands in front of the statue, reciting scriptures and praying for everyone present. All the attendants and clergy stood in a circle around him, bowing their heads to recite the scriptures. Leland noticed Ruther Huss on the inner level, his expression very resolute, and every move seemed to express some kind of noble respect and faith. With the last words of the old pastor, for Sigma, for the Empire, the daily routine prayer service came to an end. The crowd in the church gradually dispersed, and Leland followed the procession out of the church gate and stood on the steps. The holy warriors trained in the square in front of the church gate, and their weapons were mostly two-handed war hammers or one-handed cones. In terms of willpower and combat power, the holy warriors were often much stronger than the local town defenders. Some churches are built in dangerous places, and the holy warriors stationed inside have all experienced countless battles. Their bravery and fearlessness have left behind epic stories in the hearts of the lower-class people. Leland, you don't seem to pay much attention to prayer, that's not how it used to be. A familiar voice sounded beside Leland, as the old pastor wore a white robe on his shoulder, symbolizing his status as a white bishop, ranking fourth in the Sigma Church. Up there are also black robes, red robes, and gold robes, representing cardinals, archbishops, and popes, respectively. There's nothing I can do, my admiration for Sigma cannot be overstated. Leland shrugged, his face not red, his heart not jumping as he lied. Although there were gods in the medieval world, for Leland, the help they provided was not as good as his own system, and he didn't need to be trapped so deeply. But making good use of the power of religion is also a sharp blade. The old pastor noticed Leland's casualness and reminded him, being devout is not absolute, it's absolutely not devout. Leland, this is not a joke. Some people are like you said before falling into chaos. Come with me to the prayer room, Laron, there's something I need to trouble you with, Zeiss greeted, gesturing for Laron to follow him. A sturdy Sigma church often takes into account its defensive function, with a complex internal design that is unfamiliar with the terrain inside. The result of breaking in recklessly is being led astray. Without the guidance of a pastor, it is even impossible to identify the direction. On the third floor of the church, Reverend Zay opened a wooden door. Ziza's private prayer room was decorated very simply, with a single bed, wardrobe, desk, a table and chair for entertaining guests, and a prayer mat. In addition, a battle pastor armor covered in knife marks and axes hung on a corner hanger. There is also a war hammer on the nearby weapon rack, and the hammer body is coated with weapon protection oil. It seems that the old priest is very interested in this weapon. Leland finally remembered that Zeiss was once a fighting pastor of the Sigma Church. Like that armor, war left countless hidden dangers on him, which forced Zeiss not to go to the battlefield and to become a missionary priest. This is also his greatest regret in his heart. Zeiss, let me know if there's anything I can do. I'll do my best to help if I can. Leland sat across from the desk in the prayer room, opening the door to the mountain path. There is indeed something I need your help with, Leland. Well, you can tell me. The old pastor pondered for a moment before speaking. Leland, Lord Leaf of Bure, you know. Lev and Loxian. Leland nodded and became serious. Your situation won't have anything to do with him, will it? It's really related to him, the old pastor said without hiding. I need to go to the Lord's castle tomorrow. Why? The whole thing is very strange, and I know very little about it, the old pastor said with a serious expression. From the current situation, it seems that this matter is related to the Chaos believers. Can we still bring in the followers of Chaos? Leontun became interested. When it comes to the chaotic followers of the Empire, they can be said to be diverse. Hidden beneath the surface, the Chaos sect spreads to every corner of the Empire. From the decadent and corrupt sex cult of Aldolf, to the secret shrine of terror and abuse located underground in the Nur Empire's military camp, the Negative faith spread among grateful survivors of the plague, and those who crave power and offer sacrifices to the wicked. There is almost no class in society that is not affected by the corruption of destructive forces. They can offer some gifts to anyone who is dissatisfied with their own destiny. And this implies almost all humanity, whether in an empire or a foreign land. There are significant differences in the size, strength, purpose, and members of various chaotic sects, from conspiracy groups in the core areas of the empire to entire villages that secretly believe in chaos. Scholars, politicians, pastors, craftsmen, farmers, soldiers, and almost all other professions are at risk of being corrupted by chaos, often recruiting companions to expand their power. In fact, many chaotic sects have a reputable public agent operating in society, while they hide behind the scenes for manipulation. Many people have joined the chaos sect disguised as legitimate groups without realizing what kind of terror they are entering. Some chaotic sects are committed to overthrowing the imperial social system, attracting revolutionaries and instigators with great slogans, while others are simply to satisfy the desire to gain power, or to enjoy the endless pleasure brought by lust. Once believers form a sect, it is impossible to speculate on what it will do next. This cult attempts to protect its own existence, but it would be good if it could gather a large amount of new blood. A minority sect may have complete control over a town or village, luring local aristocratic forces into secretly colluding and making them pawns in wizarding schemes. Once this situation develops, the chaos sect becomes extremely dangerous because it holds the lives of many citizens and can lead them into a corrupt fate. In this situation, the chaos sect can act recklessly without legal punishment, kidnap others on the streets as dark offerings, and establish a large number of blasphemous altars in front of the authorities. 3 days ago, Lord Lev's younger brother, the chief of the city's defense, Grail and Loxian, secretly came to the church late that night and asked me to deliver the sacred objects and water from the church to Lord Lev's castle tomorrow. The old pastor slowly confided. I also asked for the reason, but Claire didn't want to answer much and only said, someone in the castle saw the chaotic demon at night. Chaos demons. Aren't they impossible to appear in the mortal world? Leland narrowed his eyes and opened his hand. So let me go to the castle with you tomorrow and kill the demons at night. Zeiss, you also overestimate my strength. I'm having some difficulty facing a big horned beast now. Isn't asking me to kill the demon purely for death. The old pastor shook his head and said solemnly, no, I don't need you to kill demons. Whether it's true or false, you can see it at a glance tomorrow. But first of all, the sacred objects and water in the church cannot be openly sent into the castle. Why? Based on my years of experience, this will involve a lot of things. To openly send the sacred objects in the church is to tell those in the dark that we know their plans, and this will only lead to more dangerous situations. Zeiss continued, of course, these are just my judgments. They may be a false alarm, but it's better to be careful in everything. I can't guarantee that there will be any fallen ones among the attendants and clergy, and even the paladins cannot fully believe them. So, Laron, you're best suited to send the sacred items in. That's also why I came to you for help. Leland stared at Zeiss for a while, weighing the pros and cons in his heart. Although he had plenty of time and could consider the delivery of letters more slowly, getting involved in an unnecessary threat was ultimately a troublesome matter. Leland took a deep breath and said, no problem, I promise you. In return, is it natural for me to have a good meal tonight and prepare a room in the church? Of course, Zeiss nodded and agreed, but you must be careful during this time. There have been many scouts around the church recently, and I guess those chaotic believers may have received some news. Living in the church, there are samurai on duty, and Leland doesn't need to worry too much about such issues. The reason why Leland agreed is because Ruther Huss is here, and in order to recruit this legendary hero in the future, frequent contact is necessary. First, improve the relationship between the two sides, and then consider the future. Afterwards, Leland stayed at the Sigma Church for a whole day, training with the paladins. Request tickets and collect. End of this chapter.